The aftermath is always worse than the maelstrom. I had experienced my fair share of physical fights by that point in my life, most of them crammed into the previous 8 to 9 months. My mother would be horrified if she knew. Her goody two-shoes Heather, getting in scuffles and scrapes. I still wasn't capable of throwing a punch or squeezing a trigger, but the wave of adrenaline and fear no longer drowned me, insensate and flailing. I could go with the flow. Now, I knew a little about how to keep myself safe, and my abyssal instincts knew even more. I could put my tentacles to some use. I could try to protect my friends. I could try not to get in the way. But nobody really remembers a fight. Short-term memory fails to encode, the body takes over, whether one is human or part human or imitation human or having a grand old time cavorting about in a human mask. Details must be reconstructed after the event, pieced back together from sense impressions and fragmentary images and consequences. I had a lot of fragments and a lot of blood and none of it made much sense. There's nothing glamorous about a fight, no matter the scale. Rain makes it look sexy, but I'm not stupid enough to believe that's anything other than my own deeply biased perspective. Movies and television show armies clashing and melding into each other, all one-on-one choreography and balletic stunt work, clean punches and counters and the sort of thing Rain goes fangirl for. But reality is brutal and banal. Rain once told me a fact about how most knife fights go to the floor in the first few seconds. Nothing poignant or graceful happens while grappling on the floor. I wouldn't have used that exact word. I'd probably have blushed to even say it. But I didn't disagree. Evelyn snapped at Rain for that one. Tenny was too absorbed in crying to pick up the swear word, too busy clinging to Lozzie, but she was still within earshot. Rain didn't much care, she was too focused on getting me to stop. Heather, hey, just sit down for a sec. You're shaking all over, you can barely stand. And you're bruised, you're gonna pull a muscle. Just slow down, slow down. Heather, hey. Heather. Sit down and rest. Impossible. Gearswin farmhouse was a wreck. Several doors were shattered, smashed from their hinges, splinters everywhere. Windows were broken, frames buckled, glass shards all over the floor. Cringe Windla's bubble servitors were drifting over to the house, joining together and stretching themselves like oily transparent putty to plug the doors and windows. But out on the grass and the edge of the field and the crumbly tarmac, great masses of bubble servitor material lay inert, shredded, ruined, and dead, heaped about the bloody mangled hulks of the outsiders they'd brought down. Cringe Windla had paid dearly. Even in my pain and panic-addled state, a hyper-polite version of me worked away silently in the back of my mind, filing a note to thank the old man outsider Cone Snail for his help. Without the bubble servitors, we'd probably not have won. Heather, Rain said. You keep walking and I'm gonna pick you up and wrap you in a blanket so you can't move. Zhang. Hey, left hand, can you maybe help me here? The shaman smells a rat. Lift her up, little wolf. Do not stop her. A stiff breeze could have stopped me. A particularly determined row of ants could have felled me dead. Rain was right, I was covered in bruises, shaking all over, my vision was swimming, and my right flank was burning inside, like the bioreactor had suffered a meltdown. My clothes were bloodied. Everyone's clothes were bloodied. The house had it the worst. 6 of the writhing blob-like outsiders had died inside the house, leaving a truly unspeakable mess. Blood and bile soaked the carpets, ichor and effluence lay in puddles, loops of strange alien intestine, scraps of jellied flesh, strips of torn skin. A significant quantity of the blood in the kitchen actually belonged to Twill. She'd won by just out-healing the thing, spilling buckets of herself all over the tiles and the cooker and the ceiling, in great splatters and splashes. It was like something out of a cartoon. Twill was usually unstoppable, always the first to bounce back. But in that aftermath she looked how I felt. As I staggered to the door into the corridor, I saw her slide down the wall, nodding in victory, but utterly drained. Even werewolves don't like to lose so much blood. Mrs. Hopton, Evelyn was saying. Her throat was thick around the words. She couldn't stand either, leaning on Preem. Mrs. Hopton. Christine. Michael. I will pay for all these damages. I brought this to your home. This is our responsibility. Heather. What's she doing? I hadn't felt this drained and broken inside, this bruised and tenderized, since before I materialized the bioreactor for the first time. But I forced my feet underneath my aching carcass and dragged myself toward the corridor. Because Sevens and Aim were missing. Rain and Zheng must have helped me. I recall nothing about leaving the room or staggering down the corridor. Perhaps I passed out and they carried me, but the next thing I knew I was standing before the pulped and mangled corpse of one of the outsiders, slumped in a meaty heap against the corridor wall. Rain was holding me upright, shoulder under my armpit. Zheng lurked on my opposite side. I had half my tentacles around each of them. The outsider corpse was one of the most hateful things I'd ever seen, and not because it looked like a pile of mashed tripe and splintered bone. Steaming softly in the shafts of sunlight, the steam rising and vanishing in gentle waves, the sodden mass itself slowly shrinking and dwindling away as we watched. Here was a dead slave, ripped from outside and turned inside out by the crushing pressure or lack thereof of our reality. Suicide bomber, I croaked. Rain raised her eyebrows but said nothing. I hadn't had time to explain the impression yet, to explain to my friends what these pitiful creatures really were. But worse than that was the memory. Flashes and fragments of standing here and ripping the thing to pieces, hissing and screeching at it. The ghost of Homo abyssus crawled across my skin in 100 tiny bruises, in the ache of my gums and the itch in my eyes and my urge to embrace the moment I'd spent killing something that had not truly wanted to fight. Sevens was right here, I said eventually. Behind me, or at my side. In her war form. She was here. She was. She can't have gone far. She cradled me when I did this. Aha, Rain said, nodding gently. Impressive stuff. All Humboldt squid on this thing's arse. Well done, would have gotten us in the rear otherwise. A screaming flash of blood and violence across my memories, making me flinch inside. When I glanced at my tentacles I found them smooth and unblemished, no sign of the hooked barbs and jagged spikes. Zheng caught my eye and broke into a grin of savage joy. She was covered in blood too, and unbothered by the mess. Sevens, I repeated. She was right here. I felt her at my back. She can't just be gone. Hey, Rain said, soft and gentle. I'm sure she's fine. All these blob dudes were accounted for. None of them could hurt Sevens, especially not if she was doing her big and scary thing. You don't know that, I said, swallowing hard, feeling my mouth go dry. My head was spinning with worry and pain. I wanted to sit down and then lie down and then probably go to sleep. I wanted to eat an entire horse, bones and all. I wanted to touch Sevens and make sure she was there. Rain, you're just saying that. I looked up and called at the ceiling and walls. Sevens. Sevens. Kimberly was there at the far end of the corridor, clutching herself in Twill's borrowed clothes. I wasn't sure how much she had heard. I caught her eye and another flash of memory crackled across my mind. Kim. I heaved. Kim, you were there, you said you saw. I must have looked horrible, because poor mousy Kimberly flinched away from me. Hey, Kim, Rain said quickly. It's all right, she's just worried. You saw this all go down, out here in the corridor. Kimberly nodded awkwardly and spoke in halting stutters. I saw. You well, I suppose you saved me. Again. Heather. Thank you. I couldn't stop. But Sevens was there. Right. Kimberly bit her lip and shook her head. She glanced back into the sitting room as if looking for help, but everyone in there was busy, mostly sorting out to move Nicole Webb to Benjamin's car with her broken leg. We couldn't call an ambulance to the farm, not with the place looking like a supernatural bomb crater, not unless we wanted to break the minds of several paramedics and get the police down here to turn this into a major incident. But then Felicity stepped out of the sitting room and joined us in the corridor. She put a gentle hand on Kimberly's shoulder and Kim looked up at her with unmistakable admiration and security. But Felicity looked right at me. "Aim is safe," she said in a broken croak, worse than her usual half-mumble through burn-scarred lips. I almost couldn't make out her words. I would know if she wasn't. Felicity didn't look healthy at the best of times. Between her extensive burn scars, her blind left eye, and her twitchy, hangdog, head-down mannerisms, she usually looked like she wanted to slink away to a dark corner and conserve what little life remained to her. But after the ritual and the fight, she seemed to stand a little straighter. I wondered how long it had been since she'd done real magic, for a purpose she believed in, to help somebody. The magic to stop the pair of outsiders in the dining room had taken a terrible toll on her. I'd seen her vomiting blood earlier. She looked like a woman who just recovered from a months-long hemorrhagic fever. Thin-faced, drawn and pale, eyes carved out like coal dust hollows. Her voice was sandpaper on broken skin. But she wasn't worried. Not a bit. What? I stammered. How can you tell? What about Sevens? Are they together? I understand what it's like. If Aim was hurt, I would know. I'd just know. She's anchored to me. Sort of. It's an inheritance thing. If she was dead I wouldn't be. I'd just know. And she can't have gone far. Rain asked, she tethered to you? Felicity nodded. Is it like that with Sevens? I shook my head. No, she goes as far as she likes. You're sure about Aim? I'm sure. She paused to cough blood into her hand, then stared at it and blinked very slowly. Kimberly slipped one arm around Felicity's waist, as if the older, taller, more experienced mage might be about to topple over. But Felicity blinked 3 times, hard and tight, forcing herself to stay present. Aim can't go more than about 200 feet from me, in the physical world. If she's submerged for some reason, she'll pop back up soon. Zheng purred. The shapeshifter is not mocking us. Felicity shook her head. Not over this. You're Sevens, she can submerge too. You mean go to the abyss, I said with a sigh. Sort of. But why now? What would Aim be doing? Felicity held my gaze with absolute certainty and unshakable belief. If Aim thought it was important enough to leave without telling us, then it was important enough to leave without telling us. Rain laughed once, an approving chuckle. Covering an angle we didn't see. Shitty gremlin doing a special operation. Felicity sighed too. One way of putting it. I stared at Rain in shock. Rain. Rain held a grin, calm and collected. If we have a traitor in our midst, Aim is pretty high up my list. How could she be bought, Fliss? Serious question. Rain, I hissed, outraged on Felicity's behalf. I'm worried about Sevens, I'm not accusing Aim of sabotage. But to my surprise, Felicity thought quietly for a moment, then answered. Aim's only price would be one of my blood relatives, and none of them have anything to do with this. Also mostly long gone. She shook her head, then winced as if suffering a headache. Kimberly said, soft and gentle, Felicity. I'm okay. That decoherency spell was not something to rush. Me and Say will both be pissing blood for a week. Somebody needs to look after her too, please. Preem will, I said. And me. Felicity, please, do you think Sevens is safe? If she's with Aim, probably, Felicity said, rubbing her aching forehead. Whatever they're doing, it's not over yet. Rain nodded. Operational security, radio silence. They must be doing that. This ain't over until everybody is back and accounted for. I could have kissed her. Well, if I could find the energy to reach upward. Instead, I just bumped my head against Rain's shoulder. From my other side, Jing let out a deep purr. Yellow and black, brass and lace. We keep an eye out for their return. Keep the drawbridge down. Rain laughed. Getting all poetic on us, left hand. I respect the yellow, if not the princess. She belongs to the shaman. We hold the ground. Zheng had the luxury of waiting or at least of standing around and looking intimidating, because she was very good at that and didn't play well with others, but the rest of us slipped into the slow ache of cleanup and recovery, that dull haze of non-lethal pain and too much work, the aftermath of any real confrontation. This was, however, the largest and messiest fight I'd ever personally been part of, in a place somebody would have to clean up. The only point of comparison I had was the 2 corpses we'd had to get rid of once, back in the kitchen in number 12, Barnslow Drive. Every other time we had thrown hands, as Rain put it, we'd managed to keep the mess contained somewhere that mundane authorities and normal people would never see. But Gearswin Farmhouse was Twill's family home, and now it was covered in blood and mess. The poor thing was so wounded, so bruised and battered. Even after I calmed down about 7s, I dragged Rain back into the dining room, staggering and lurching, trying to pat the walls with my tentacles. I kept saying, I'm sorry, I'm sorry. Rain was getting desperate. I wouldn't sit down, wouldn't stop. All around me, the real cleanup was beginning. I can pay for the windows and doors, professional cleaning for the carpets too, Evelyn was saying. Though the blood. Christine was horribly pained by the offer. Miss say, Evelyn, please. My father can chip in for once. I won't hear a word against it. Sit, said Preem. Amanda gently corrected them both. Cringe-Windla's angels will handle the biological matter. The doors and windows are Sit down, said Preem. Apparently I wasn't the only one refusing to rest. The angels can clean that too, Amanda said. You, went Twill. Rain had once shown me a computer game about cleaning up after a stereotypical horror movie climax, blood and guts all up the walls, bits of monster everywhere, that sort of thing. It was all very cartoony and silly, with lots of mops and buckets and wet wipes. The real thing was a lot less easily solved. Bubble servitors started bobbing all about the place, flattening themselves against the walls and carpets like giant semi-translucent slugs, sucking up the blood and digesting the viscera. Everyone else had to wear those magically modified glasses all the time to avoid bumping into the things, or stepping on them, or worse. Amanda Hopton stood in the middle of the sitting room, swaying with her eyes closed, presumably conducting the creatures, a conduit for the will of her god. Mr. George tried to help for a little while, scrubbing at the kitchen, but then ended up standing out on the patio, chain-smoking with shaking hands. Michael Hopton and Katie helped put Nicole Webb in the back of Benjamin's Land Rover, her arms clutching their shoulders, their strength keeping her broken right leg off the floor. The detective was panting, coated in cold sweat, gritting her teeth as they carried her down the corridor and out onto the crumbling tarmac. I followed, dragging Rain behind me again, lurching down the corridor. I wouldn't take no for an answer, didn't give her a choice. Heather, Rain said, gentle but firm, as if holding back the whip crack which would make me obey. Heather, you really need to sit down. They've got Nikki now, she's gonna be fine. Heather. Don't make me get Evie to shout at you, hey. I have to check on her. Rain, she's hurt. We got her hurt. Rain helped me out the front door and down the brick steps. The crisp sunlight hurt my eyes and made my head pound like a leather drum. I had to squint and blink until my vision stopped swirling. A dead outsider lay against the nearest fence, steaming gently as it melted away under the conditions of our reality. A ring of bubble servitors hung over the mangled corpse, as if worried it might spring back to life again. A greater ring of bubbles circled the house, on guard. Many more angels had fanned out across the fields, hovering at the treetops, watching for an opportunistic second assault. Really got to thank Ringy, I murmured. Rain laughed softly as I dragged her closer to the Land Rover. Ringy. Ringy. I was making it cute, but really I was too exhausted to pronounce his name properly. Terrible of me, I know. Ringy it is then. Zheng followed us outdoors too, stealthy and close. She was worried for my physical condition, whatever she said. A small argument was unfolding by the open back door of Benjamin's beefy green Land Rover. Katie had wandered off somewhere, Nicole was inside the car, but Ben and Michael were frowning at each other. Manchester, not Sherrowford, Michael was saying. Nicole's voice panted from inside the back seat of the Land Rover. Sherrowford's fine. Michael said, it's a clean break, there's no visible bone. Manchester will be safer. Ben, Manchester. Okay. Why Manchester? I asked. Everyone paused and looked at me in a funny way, like I was liable to pull their faces off. Nicole said from inside the Land Rover, "'Cause they think we're gonna get in trouble." Yeah, Ben said in a grunt. He was standing there with the front of the car already open, one hand filled with his keys. Come on, Mike, she's an ex-cop and a PI. If they wanna know shit, she's got the connections to tell them no. I'm just some lug she hired to watch a job. Nobody's gonna care. It's a break, not a bullet wound. Sherrowford, Nicole spat. Take her to Sherrowford General, Rain said. Nikki knows her stuff. Real hard-boiled type, her. Right you are, said Ben. Michael hopped inside and crossed his arms. At least take Katie too. Don't do it alone, Ben. You're not a superhero. Ben guffawed. Yeah, that's Twill's department. He paused then nodded at me, awkwardly. Or hers. Alright, go get Katie then. Where'd she get to? Checking on the sheep, Michael said. Ben shook his head and turned toward the little stables, stepping away to fetch Katie. I dragged myself over to the open back door of the car, pulling Rain with me. My flanks were burning, especially on the right side, like my appendix had burst or a muscle had torn away from a bone. But I slumped against the open door, half my tentacles clinging to the roof, and peered inside. Nicole was laid out on the back seat, her right shin at a sickening angle. She frowned at me, plastered with sweat, pale-faced, and panting softly. Heather, she croaked. I can't stop her, Rain said. She won't sit still. Nikki, I said. Are you going to be all right? A stupid question, how would she know? But my heart demanded I ask, demanded an answer, demanded that I care. Nicole Webb grimaced, a horrible attempt at a smile. She was so brave. Snothing. Just a break. Need a cast. And morphine. Oh yeah, looking forward to that. I sagged, tentacles slackening. Of course she was going to be okay. Good. That's good. A twitch in my side. One tentacle peeled off the roof of the car and hovered in the air. I wasn't thinking, just following instinct. Rain asked, you ever broken a bone before, Gumshoe? Once. When I was teenager. Ribs. Fist fight. Rain let out a low whistle. Teenage tearaway, huh? Wouldn't have counted you as a bad girl. Nikki. Detective. To you. Nicole grunted. Haynes. She was lying. Nicole Webb was lying. She wasn't going to be okay. Her leg was broken in too many places, she was going to get an infection, she was bleeding through her clothes and she wouldn't get to the hospital in time. I stared at her in the pounding sunlight, too much brightness lancing through the backs of my eyeballs and into my brain. How could I look at her writhe on the back seat of that Land Rover? She was going to die and it would be our fault. My fault, my brain was screaming. Why was she lying? My breath was coming in fits and starts. One tentacle tip quivered and softened. Heather. Rain said my name. It was drowned out by static inside my head. Hey, Heather, take a step back, come on. Nikki's fine. What's wrong with her? I wanted to scream. What was wrong with me? What about Nicole, what about her broken leg, the way she was fading, the pain on her face? How could Rain not see it? Why wasn't anybody calling an ambulance? Why was Rain trying to peel me off the car? This whole mess was my fault. My responsibility. Nicole's pain was my responsibility. The broken leg was my responsibility. I had to put it right, I had to make it right, I had the tools to make it right. Rain, she's. I know. I've got the glasses on, I can see. An angel heals her flock. One of my tentacles darted into the back of the Land Rover, the tip already softening on the exterior, hardening inside with a needle of dripping biosteel. Instinct took over, pumped the limb full of unspeakable fluids and abyssal-derived enzymes. Somebody took me by the shoulders, but I hissed and bucked and almost fell over, banging one knee against the car, bruises screaming. The tentacle tip blossomed open to reveal a shining needle 12 inches long. Nicole couldn't see it, but she would feel it in a moment. I would fix her, I would fix this mistake, I would make everything right. Then I would fix Gearswin Farmhouse, and Felicity's pain, and Kimberly's fear and Tenny's crying and Lozzie's horror, and I would find Seven's and. My bioreactor sputtered to life, to provide the payload for the needle, to replenish what I was about to extract from myself. Heat blossomed in my flank, then flared out like an explosion, turning to ball of acid burning through my guts. My vision flicked black, then red, then went out. I remembered falling away from the Land Rover. I didn't remember Rain catching me, but I was assured later that she did. Rain always caught me, even when I was being a self-destructive fool. That time I really did pass out. Consciousness slammed back about 15 minutes later, the world just suddenly there in front of me, alive and moving. I was sitting bolt upright on the sofa at the back of the Hoptons' dining room, with Rain clicking her fingers in front of my eyes. Heather, Heather, she was saying, Heather, come on, come back. Heather, Heather. Evelyn said, from right next to me, try splashing her with water. Lozzie, said Preem. I trust her too, Rain said, but I'd be more comfortable if Heather was conscious and responding. Hey, maybe we should splash her. Ah, I winced, blinking several times and screwing my eyes shut as I came around. Rain, stop, please, I'm fine, I'm fine. Don't splash me with water, please. Rain let out a huge sigh of relief and leaned back on her haunches. She was kneeling in front of me. Evelyn sighed too, strangled and tight. Through my blurred vision I realized she was sitting next to me, on the sofa. Preem was standing a few feet away, watching us both. We were seated in the clearest, cleanest part of the dining room, furthest away from the slowly melting corpses of the dead outsiders. They were little more than puddles of steaming goo now, almost gone. Bubble servitors lay against most surfaces, metabolizing the blood and guts. Other people moved in the kitchen and out on the patio, turned to ghosts by my blurred vision. I felt like I'd spent a night vomiting. My stomach muscles ached as if I'd been punched in the gut. The right side of my abdomen burned, hot and hard and stiff inside. Without thinking, I gathered my tentacles in my arms, hugging them to my front, making sure they were still manifested and attached to me. Some instinctive part of my mind was afraid they might have turned to ash and faded away to nothing, like in the early days before my bioreactor, when bodily euphoria was hard-won and often abandoned in pain. But I was whole, I was here. She's back, Rain sighed. Heather, Heather, open your eyes and tell me how many fingers I'm holding up. I never left, I murmured, trying to piece together the last few minutes. I blinked and squinted. 3 fingers. And now 2. And now 4. Rain, stop, Keep your eyes open. Rain flicked on her mobile phone's flashlight function, then half-blinded me with it while she watched my pupils react. "Good, you're not concussed." "Small mercies," Evelyn grumbled. "Mercy," said Preem. I cleared my throat, croaking and dry. Somebody Preem pressed a glass of water into my hands. I had to let go of my tentacles to accept it, but it went down sweet and rough, scouring blood and mucus out of my throat. I coughed for a moment, Rain's hand on my back. Was I unconscious? I almost lurched out of the chair in horror when my memories clicked back into place. Nikki. Did I stab Nikki? Rain caught me, firmly and insistently, and pressed me back down into the sofa. Preem caught the glass which had tumbled from my hands. "You passed out before you could stab anybody," Rain said. "Nikki's fine, on her way to the hospital." "Heather, slow down, take a deep breath. Breathe with me, okay? In and out, there you go, that's it. Just sit. Sit right there. Relax." I tried my best to do as I was told, but my tentacles pushed against the sofa. "Rain, I don't know what came over me. I was going to do to her what I did to the night. Fix her. I'm sorry." "Hey," Rain said, flashing a grin. "No pumping other ladies with your ovipositor, okay? Rain." I squeaked in horror. She laughed, but the joke had distracted me long enough to short-circuit my desire to stand up and keep moving. "Just breathe, Heather. Don't think about anything for a bit. Head empty," said Preem. "No thoughts." Evelyn sighed like this was the most stupid thing she'd ever heard. "You too," said Preem. "Head empty." Yes, Evelyn grumbled. Rain spent a couple of minutes kneeling in front of me, rubbing my hands, making sure I really was present and not leaving again. I could tell she was worried by the way she watched my eyes and my face, by the tension in her shoulders, the expectant waiting in her musculature. Eventually, when I felt I'd been a good girl and taken enough slow, calming breaths, I explained. "I didn't go anywhere, Rain. I was just unconscious." Rain winced. Evelyn grumbled, "No, you bloody weren't." "Excuse me." Rain sighed. Her pained expression hurt me in a way I couldn't really deal with. She said, "For the first few minutes, sure you were. You were out cold. But then you sat up and opened your eyes and just sat there." She pulled a grin, but it was fractured inside. "Thought you'd gone diving again." I shook my head. "I won't go back to the abyss. I think I just ran too hot." Ow. I pressed a hand to my right flank, where the flesh was stiff and sore. My skin there did feel hot, as if I was running a localized fever, or had an infection. "Maintenance cycle required," said Preem. Rain laughed gently. "How do you feel, Heather?" "My reactor hurts," I said, ashamed to admit it. "I feel like I've pulled a muscle or strained something. That's what knocked me out. I tried to fire it back up, and well, now it kind of burns. Maybe give it a rest then, yeah." Rain said, then reached out and squeezed my knees. Her tone was silk over iron. "I would rest whether I wanted to or not. But I have to help." A lump grew in my throat. "Rain, this is all my fault, I have to help, I have to." A hand grabbed my arm so hard the grip hurt my bones. Evelyn's fingers dug into my flesh. I winced and turned, an automatic complaint on my lips, but Evelyn wore an expression like a pagan goddess who had discovered her temple surrounded by an invading army. She was half collapsed into the sofa, her eyes pits of exhaustion, looking more like a crumpled old woman than ever before. Skin waxy with effort, lips a tight line, her expression burned me right through. White phosphorus in a human shell. My words died in my throat. "Evie. We cannot take you to hospital," she crunched out. "Oh, okay." I swallowed, and nodded, and eased myself back into the sofa cushions. "Okay, Evie. I obey." Had I really said that earlier? I had. And here I was, doing it again. Good, Evelyn said with a huge sigh. The energy seemed to go out of her, and she leaned back right next to me, shoulder to shoulder. Her long blonde hair was escaping her ponytail. Rest or I'll have Preem tie you up. You too, said Preem. Evie huffed and waved that comment away. Twill stuck her head around the kitchen door. Hey, Rain, we need another pair of hands. Heather good? Heather good, yeah. Hey, Big H. Everyone's cool. Well, Auntie Amanda's kinda whacked, but she's always like that. Rain. Sure, Rain said, straightening up. She stroked my hair back from my forehead. Stay here, okay, just rest, just relax. I nodded. I'll be good. Where is Zheng? Checking on the bubbles, making sure there's nothing coming through the woods. Just rest. Promise me. I promise. She turned to Preem. Keep an eye on these two, yeah. Make sure they don't run with scissors or play with fire. Both eyes, said Preem. Rain went off to help Twill, into the kitchen, probably to carry a body, or swab blood, or oversee the angels doing something disgusting. I just sat there, shoulder to shoulder with Evelyn, staring at the wreck of the room and the shattered back door covered with a film of stretched-out bubble servitors. It was a very strange place to take a little break, but to be fair I had sat down and rested in far more alien locales. Lousy. I croaked after a moment. Went to Camelot with Tenny, Evelyn said, dry and scratchy. Lousy took one look at you and said you were fine. Only reason I didn't panic. Tenny was inconsolable. Needed to get her away from all this. Poor Tens. A long pause stretched between us, comfortable and companionable. Eventually I said, we should buy her something. As an apology. Or a treat. Or a reminder that we all love her. But what? Moth plushie. I suggested. Poor taste, Evelyn grumbled. Why? It's just like a doll, but more like her. Heather, she's got the mind of a 14-year-old. A doll would be an insult. Oh. Maybe a very large moth plushie. Deluxe size. We slipped into silence again. My right flank and my head were competing to produce the most worrying, throbbing sensations. My eyes itched, my teeth felt too sharp, and Evelyn felt lovely and warm against my shoulder. Without thinking about the implications, I snuggled a little closer to her. But I kept one tentacle at full extension, draped over the opposite arm of the sofa, the tentacle I'd almost used on Nicole. The tip still felt spongy. Evelyn's shoulder was both bony and soft at the same time. Something inside me could tell how exhausted she was, how drained and brittle and dry. My needle tentacle twitched and quivered. Part of me wanted to inject her, too. Bloody hell, Evelyn said, apropos of nothing. You can say that again, I mumbled. I blinked hard and tried to concentrate on anything except the desire to penetrate Evelyn with my tentacle. I was certainly not going to mention it. I glanced up at Preem instead. Our faithful doll demon was wearing the rags of her maid uniform, bloody and shredded but untouched beneath. Chin high, spine straight, no amount of disrobing or damage could touch her dignity and poise. She stared back at me with clear blank white eyes. Thank you for protecting Evie, I said. Thank you for protecting Evie, she echoed back at me. I pulled an awkward smile and said, are we in the naughty corner right now? Are you meant to make sure we don't get up and cause more trouble? Evelyn rolled her eyes. Heather, rest, for pity's sake. Preem said in her bell-clear voice, bad girls sit in the timeout seat. Together. Evelyn and I shared an awkward look, faces only inches apart. Evelyn cleared her throat and I turned away, suddenly self-conscious. This was getting silly. We shared a moment of burning awkwardness amid the rubble. "Heather," Evelyn said eventually, and I knew by her tone of voice that this was going to be a significant change of subject. "What happened earlier?" When I looked back at Evie, she'd shed the awkward embarrassment, probably on purpose, dragging us back to a practical topic to save us both. Her eyes burned with a mage's curiosity, but I mostly felt awkward and guilty. "I'm sorry," I said. I know. Don't inject anybody with the magical life juice, I know. I didn't mean to, I wasn't even thinking about it, not consciously. I just saw Nicole in the back of the car, injured and in pain and my fault. And I'm so worried about Sevens. I had to do something, I had to." Evelyn watched me trail off, frowning harder and harder. For a moment I was certain she was going to snap at me. "Evie," she said, very slowly and carefully, "Heather, I'm not talking about your concerning desire to spread your seed or whatever." "Evie," I squeaked, blushing even through the exhaustion and pain. "I'm talking about earlier. You went full rip and tear." I blinked at her, coming down from my blush. "You mean when the outsiders got indoors?" "Yes." Evelyn wet her lips and swallowed, staring at me the whole time. "You went feral. For a second I was worried you were out of control or something, when I saw you walk into this room. A cold feeling settled into my belly." "Oh. I don't recall it very well. I think I spooked Kimberly." Evelyn just stared at me, waiting for an explanation, or to see if I would erupt into a ball of tentacles. Preem stared too. I couldn't take that, I couldn't deal with being looked at in that way by Evelyn, of all people. I stammered. I wanted to, I felt like I couldn't help. Evelyn snorted, which surprised me. I blinked up at her again. "Yes, Heather, you never can help being heroic. You've made that point plenty of times. Stop being so bashful." I blinked rapidly. "Heroic?" Evelyn huffed and rolled her eyes. "If you hadn't dealt with that outsider at our rear, it would have burst into the room while Felicity and I were trying to complete the spell. Probably would have gone right through us. God knows I didn't have the energy left to hit it with my walking stick. Well done, Heather, you saved us again. So stop acting all modest. Give yourself more credit." I stared, dumbstruck. "I thought you were looking at me in disgust." "Eh?" Evelyn squinted. "I was full squid, wasn't I? I'm covered in bruises now, I'm going to be paying for this tomorrow, which means I must have instinctively covered myself in plates and spines. I remember bits of it. I must have been a sight." "I didn't have my glasses on," said Evie. She frowned as if this made no sense at all. "I'm sure you looked glorious, stop beating yourself up." Such a final dismissal, such a casual sideswipe, Evelyn's tone left no doubt that she simply did not care what I looked like, even covered in spikes and armor plating in spitting venom. And she wasn't putting it on for my sake, she wasn't being polite or kind or accepting. She just didn't care. I love this woman too much. "Oh, Evie." I put one arm around her front in an awkward hug, so very gently, more of a hover hand than an embrace. She went stiff, but patted my arm in return. "We're already splattered with blood, Heather. Don't make it worse." She cleared her throat. "But thank you." "Yes. I think." I let go and leaned back into the sofa, beaming at her. Preem said, staring right at me, "Very elegant. Such fast. Much squid." "Oh." I beamed at her too at the exact moment Evelyn sighed like a bellows and looked like she wanted to reach up and flick Preem in the forehead. "You're very lucky you are my daughter," Evelyn said to Preem. "If Twill said that I'd put her in a kennel for a week." "Concern," said Preem. Evelyn's jaw went tight. I wasn't following any of this, I was just delighted to get called elegant. Nobody had ever called me elegant before. "Thank you, Preem." Are you okay? How are you feeling? Your maid dress is all shredded, we're going to need to get you a replacement. Preem said nothing, just stared. Ahem, ladies, came Twill's voice as she wandered in from the main corridor. What's this about putting me in a kennel? Like to see you try, say. Like to see you try. Twill shot us both a wink, thrumming with energy, fully recovered from her ordeal. She was an even bigger mess than Preem, covered in gore and missing bits of her clothes, though she'd made a token effort to wipe her face and hands. More like an ice bath, Evelyn grumbled. Aren't you gonna wash that off? Actually yeah, Twill said. Feel kinda vile. Figured there's no point until we've slung all the hounds in a hole first though. She nodded at me. Hey, Big H, I couldn't help overhearing some of that. Some of what you were saying. Eavesdropping? I asked, then tooted. Oh, Twill. It's my house. And I was helping haul one of those freak corpses out of the little sitting room, before it melts into the carpet. Look, I was just wondering, how come you reacted so differently to the hound going for Kim earlier? I blinked at her, not quite following. I'm sorry. You know. Twill grinned wide, all teeth, and I realized she was trying to help me. Bless her, she was trying to help me with Evie. For Kim you did a big leap, but with those things getting in here you lost your rag and went berserk. Which was way cool, by the way. Caught a snatch of it myself. I sighed and narrowly resisted the urge to pinch the bridge of my nose. Twill, I lost control because all my friends and family were being threatened. And because those outsiders are an obscenity. Yeah but. Twill, I sighed. For once, Evelyn was the one not following the hidden subtext of this conversation. Twill wanted me to say, I did it to protect Evie. But that wasn't true. I did it to protect everybody. Twill's grin turned awkward. She nodded along. Yeah, course. But you know, it was. I did it because this is all my fault, Twill. I lost control because I was angry, because we were going to get hurt. Because of me. This was all for me, in the end. Don't tell me it wasn't. If it wasn't for me, and then Maisie, then nobody would have gotten hurt here today. You all did this for me. This house is wrecked, Nicole has a broken shin, and we may have traumatized Tenny. I made Lozzie kill something. All because of me. And I can't do anything to thank you. Enough. You and everybody else. I owe you too much. I couldn't stop the words once I started speaking them. Twill went quite still, she hadn't expected an outburst of emotion in response to her terrible attempt at being my wingwoman. I took a shuddering breath and turned my eyes down to the stained and bloody carpet. Evelyn's lips parted with a wet click. Heather. This was for all of us, said Christine Hopton. I looked up as she stepped into the room behind Twill. Wearing sensible shoes and a multicolored shawl over her shoulders, she looked smaller than ever, shrunken and hardened, showing every single one of her years. But Twill's mother, so much like Twill herself, gave me a warm smile. Mum, Twill huffed. You were eavesdropping. Pot kettle black, dear, said Christine. Pick your battles. Twill huffed and let her shoulders slump. I had the feeling she'd heard that particular line many times before. I'm sorry for doing so much damage to your home, I said. Sorry, she echoed, acting surprised. I knew it was acting, but she was so good at it, her gentle tone of voice invited one to simply go along with the play. You're apologizing to me, and to my husband, and to Twill, and Amanda too for something done by Edward Lilburn? But if I wasn't? If you weren't here, then my daughter would never have made so many friends in the city. If you weren't here, then I doubt the church would have been able to reconcile with Miss Say. If you weren't here to warn us all those months ago, then the Sherrowford cult may have gotten the better of us. If you weren't here, we wouldn't have witnessed so many miracles. But your doors and windows would be intact, I said. I almost sobbed. Evelyn reached down and squeezed my hand. Christine hopped and laughed. Doors and windows can be replaced. Blood can be washed out of carpets. Even bones can be set. All of these things are worth the long-term security we are buying by working together. You did not do any of this, Heather. Edward Lilburn did. And our God wants him gone too. I started crying softly. Had to wipe my tears away on my sleeve. Geez, Mum, said Twill. Hush, dear. Truth, said Preem. And it was. Evelyn cleared her throat. Mrs. Hopton. Christine, please. I know we've had our differences, but please. Christine, Evelyn sighed. I was too busy wiping my face to watch the exchange. Windows and doors can be repaired, but that does require money. I was not joking about my willingness to fund repairs to your home. Especially since insurance is going to have issues, if they decide to properly investigate and audit this. I felt rather than saw the smile on Christine Hopton's face. And I felt Amanda step into the room behind her. I felt their God shifting inside both their minds, a sliver of a giant seen through a keyhole. That's very kind of you to offer, Christine said. But we've dealt with insurance assessors before. Cringe-Windla can be very persuasive to uninitiated minds. Ew, went Twill. Seriously? After your grandfather passed away, we had to improvise. A moment of creeping silence. I cleared my eyes and found Evelyn regarding our hosts with a tightness in her jaw. Twill was cringing away from her mother and her aunt. A bubble servitor was sitting on Amanda Hopton's shoulders like a cross between a parrot and a portable pillow. Quite, said Evelyn. No lasting damage, said Amanda, eyes hazy and lids drooping, speaking for her God. Less said the better, Evelyn grunted. My offer stands. Christine nodded. We can talk about that later, Evelyn. For now I think we all need a cup of tea and a sit down. Tea, said Preem. Christine continued, I think the worst of the cleanup is done. I'll call the others back. Should we strategize? I take it that's your next move. Our next move is finding Sevens, I said. We have to wait, or... Twill was staring out of the shattered back doors, through the film of bubble servitors, across the patio, toward the edge of the forest, frowning and squinting. I trailed off. The others followed my gaze. Twill. Christine said. Dear. Hold up a sec, there's what? Evelyn sighed explosively. If there's a second giant spider, I'm calling Jan so she can nuke us from orbit. Haha, yeah. Twill stepped closer to the window. There's a guy. A dude. At the edge of the woods. I craned to see, but Twill's eyes were better than mine, better than any human. I couldn't see anything except clean sunlight and the darkness beneath the trees. Evelyn had gone stiff. A stray walker. Nah, he's looking this way. Binoculars. Shit. A grin ripped across Twill's lips. She flexed her fingers like unsheathing a weapon. This is Eddie's follow-up, to check if we're dead, right? Somebody find Zheng and Rain. We can get him and... A voice like rusty nails down a rotten blackboard scratched across the inside of my skull, making my teeth judder and my eyes water. Hush, hasty Wolfie, said Aim, nestled in the corner of the room, a pool of a shadow in the junction between two walls. We're hunting rabbits. And we've almost got him. Aim. But no Sevens, not that I could see. I hurled myself off the sofa. I reached for Aim with half my tentacles. The other half retained a sliver of sense, slapping desperately at the floor in a futile effort to keep me on my feet. A poor decision, but I plead panic born of love. In my mind's eye I was meant to stagger toward Aim, grab her by those thin, lace-drowned shoulders, and shake her. I was meant to shout, where is Sevens? This was a bad plan, not only because I couldn't stand, nor because the only sound I could make was a hissing squeak, but mostly because aim wasn't properly manifested. There was nothing to grab and shake. She did not currently possess shoulders, thin and lace-clad or otherwise. Aim was an amorphous veil of darkness. She was probably feeling shy. Or playing silly games. Preem had to step in and catch me before I could fall flat on my face. The only injury was to my dignity, but it was a nasty wound. To my credit, I didn't instinctively attack her with my tentacles or hiss in her face, which would have been deeply mortifying and require hours of penance later. Instead, I blushed and fussed and clung to her in gratitude, embarrassed by my outburst and quite off balance. I muttered various species of thank you and sorry and I'm so clumsy, but Preem ignored it all with her usual affectless acceptance. She deposited me back on the sofa as gently as she could. Evie instantly clung to my arm, as if to stop me from attempting another escape. Everyone was talking at once, including me. Aim. Aim. I was saying, trying to get a look around Preem's hip. Sevens, where's Sevens? Twill was saying, what do you mean, hunting rabbits? Who's that guy, hey? She pointed at the gap where the back doors had once stood, now filled with semi-transparent bubble servitors. You mean you're on him? You're after him? Evelyn snapped her voice like a whip, explain yourself, you vile thing. Heather, stay put. Stay. Christine and Amanda both looked rather shocked by all this. Christine was trying to ask a question, but her words were lost in the noise. Rain darted back into the room, probably drawn by the sound of my panicked voice. Felicity was hot on her heels, but she stopped dead when she saw Aim's shadow mass in the corner. Despite the cacophonous near panic, I clearly saw the tension drain away from her shoulders and depart the muscles of her face, the moment she saw Aim. Kimberly didn't stop in time. She bounced off Felicity's back, which almost sent Felicity sprawling, because the mage was still exhausted and spent. They caught each other, awkwardly close. I wished them luck. Mr. George and Michael Hopton blundered in too, late to the show. What's going on now? Michael thundered. Is it kicking off again? Ben and Katie aren't even here, we don't have the firepower for another. Aim, hey, Twill was saying, voice sharp and clear for once, cutting across the others. If you're hunting, I gotta know. And somebody find Zheng. Found, Zheng rumbled from the doorway. A few people jumped. Zheng had appeared almost as quietly as Aim had. Sevens. I was almost screeching. Where's Aim? Or the pool of black mist that contained the concept of Aim went, shoo. Shoo. It was like being hushed by a throat full of flaking rust mixed with the sound of nails down a chalkboard, but inside one's own head. Several people winced. Twill sneezed and swore. Zheng growled. I swore I saw a tentacle or two drifting inside that cloud of black nothing, like a hand concealing a naughty smile. Aim continued in a lessier punishing voice. We've almost hooked him over the line, sweeties and swooties. I've only nipped back to make sure Wolfbrain here doesn't rush out there and ruin the whole trick. Don't spook him. He's so close to the jaws. A slick slap of tongue and a clack of teeth came from within the black mist, as if slavering over a delicious morsel. Twill spoke quickly, with more confidence than she usually showed, heading off any further confusion. She stretched out both hands in an everybody stop gesture. Whoa, okay, she hissed under her breath, as if we were trying to stay quiet and stealthy inside a deer blind. Nobody move, nobody look at the window, door bubbles, you know what I mean. She's got a point. If they've been reeling that guy in, then we don't want to disturb the hunt. Rain looked suddenly alert. Her pistol was in her hands. What guy? Twill pointed at the hole in the back of the house, covered with a makeshift skin of stretched bubble servitor, like oil suspended in water between two layers of cling film. There's a guy, at the edge of the woods. Don't look. Pretend we haven't seen. Right? Aim giggled, a raspy noise like pine cones crushed beneath steel boots. Good Wolfie. You get it, yes you do. How about some scritches later, mmHmm? Twill froze, deeply confused. Evelyn snapped, you leave Twill alone or I will remove both your hands. Twill, don't respond to that. Yeah, Twill said, then cleared her throat. Look, just, chill, okay? Everybody chill, don't look at the woods. Let Aim do her thing. Amanda said, slurring her words, made it so he can't see through the angels. We can see out. Can't see in. Clever, clever. Aim purred in approval. The logistics of that statement made me frown inside. Unaltered human beings couldn't see the bubble servitors in the first place. But I didn't have the spare mental bandwidth to question it just then. I trusted Hringewindla on this. Rain said quickly, it's not Edward himself, is it? Confirm that. Evelyn hissed. He wouldn't be that stupid, but... Twill shook her head. Nah. Too young. It's not him. Evelyn tooted. Pity. Sevens. I hissed. Aim, where is Sevens? From within that black mist I felt an awareness turn toward me, an observer deep in the darkness looking back, as if Aim was only just now paying proper attention. The darkness thickened and shrank. For a second I thought Aim was leaving again, tormenting me with doubt and uncertainty over Seven's safety. I almost lurched out of the sofa all over again, anchored only by Evelyn's iron-hard grip on my arm. But the darkness sucked itself into a solid form, like vacuum-packed plastic wrap. Mist became black lace, head to toe, without a scrap of skin showing, Aim's face hidden deep inside a hood. Diminutive and concealed, the slight little figure trotted over to the sofa as if escaping a darkened cellar. Before I could yelp in surprise or ward her off, Aim wriggled down next to me as if retreating from the rest of the room, from all the other curious gazes turned her way. She even hid from Felicity, burrowed down by my burning right flank. Aim. I croaked, spiritually uncomfortable. Her hip against mine felt just like a regular human being. She squirmed into the embrace of my tentacles, like a tiny fish seeking cover in the seaweed. What are you? A tiny voice whispered forth, your fiancé is fine, stop whining. She's hunting. I'm yours for the moment so don't betray her trust, squid for brains. Let me shelter. Twill said, Heather, she say something. Sevens is fine, I replied with a shuddering sigh. I guess she's conducting the hunt. Aim whispered with her hidden face pressed into my shoulder. Tell them it's time to move. Wolfie, the murder dyke, and your muscle zombie. Get them together. Here's the plan. Don't screw it up. Seven's plan for it was her plan, Aim was only the messenger was hardly complex enough to justify all this cloak-and-dagger skullduggery, especially when several of us were so exhausted. But Aim assured me in her hissing, warbling, broken little voice that it was essential, it was the only way to catch this skip-hop-skitter beast of a man. Said Twill when I repeated that particular description. What's that meant to mean, is he really good at running away? Aim giggled in my ear, a professional runner away, yes. I relayed the plan. Evelyn critiqued it a bit, though she was basically on board from the start. Twill and Zheng both approved though Zheng insisted she be responsible for the tackle, rather than Twill. Rain was doubtful, but Zheng said, we watch each other, little wolf. None will get at our backs. That seemed to do the trick. Getting into place was a little bit awkward. The clock was ticking, by the time Aim had explained the plan and I'd relayed it and the others had agreed, the man at the edge of the woods had begun to creep into the fields. Aim had not exaggerated, he did look professional, even at a distance, across the farm, seen through a wall of bubble servitors. Perhaps it was the way he moved, or the way he held himself, or the simple hiking clothes he wore. He walked with slow and exaggerated care, eyes up, awareness spread wide. He stopped every few paces to look over his shoulder, crane his neck to see around the corners of the house, take pictures with his phone, stare through his binoculars, and write in a little notebook he kept pulling out of his coat. He couldn't see the bubble servitors shadowing his every move. They had him boxed in, covered from behind, even from the sky, bobbing and writhing with invisible glory. But they couldn't do the deed. If we're wrong and he's a mage, he could go right through them, Evelyn had said. No, it has to be real flesh to do the job. Abyssal instinct stirred as I watched. Instinct knew. He was no predator, this man acted like prey. We observed him from the back door, or rather, the hole where the back door used to be. Everybody who was not directly involved in trapping this poor man like a skittish rabbit clustered around to watch. Amanda assured us again that the bubble servitors would make it impossible for him to see us. I didn't question the numismatic mechanics of that, I'd had enough headaches for one day. However, I could barely stand up. My right flank burned like a chunk of star lodged inside my flesh. Kimberly helped me, arm beneath mine. But so did Aim. She stuck uncomfortably close, propped me up, her tiny black lace form wedged into my side and aggravating my bruises. I returned the favor and wrapped her in tentacles for support, but she didn't complain. Preem helped Evelyn to stand, she was lucky. We watched the suspicious man make his way across the field, as the others got into position. He didn't look like much, just a stray hiker with a sturdy walking stick, a camel print coat, and a big sensible backpack. Christine Hopton cleared her throat gently. We're not about to traumatize some uninvolved gentleman, are we? Evelyn sighed sharply. With all due respect, High Priestess, that man is taking notes. Watch how he moves, I croaked. He's up to something. He's skulking. He was also speaking to somebody who wasn't there. Every few seconds he turned his head to the left and spoke a little. The actual words were lost to distance and muffled by the walls of the house. But he was speaking to somebody, pausing, responding, answering questions. I whispered under my breath, "Good job, Sevens. Good, good, keep it up. Good girl. I love you, you can do it." Aim whispered into my hot, aching flank, "She's brilliant. She is. And beautiful." I glanced down at Aim, but her face was still hidden deep inside her hood. She clung to me like an animal in the shelter of a cliff. I knew Felicity was watching with great curiosity, but the older mage didn't seem bothered by this newfound and unexpected clingy Aim. Which was a relief. If she'd shown jealousy, I think I would have been disgusted. Executing the plan went lightning fast. There wasn't really much to it. Rain stepped around the side of the house, raised her handgun and shouted, "Police, freeze." Aim had been very specific that Rain needed to shout, "Police." It made me wish Nicole wasn't currently halfway to Sherriford General Hospital, she would have been either delighted or outraged, I'm not sure which. None of us actually saw Rain, not from the angle of the doorway, but we heard her shout. She was wonderfully authoritative. The hiking man froze for a split second, then turned to run, ducking and weaving, both hands hooked into the straps of his backpack. Not the response of somebody who'd never had a gun pointed at him before, but the last resort of a desperate professional. Twill and Jing burst from the tree line behind him, corralled him in about half a second, and then Jing hit him like a wrecking ball. She delivered a rugby tackle to fell an elephant, though she'd been given strict instructions not to actually kill or maim him, so she did cradle his head in one hand before they hit the ground. After all, we did want to have a word with him. 10 minutes later we had Edward Lilburn's after-action scout tied up in the Hoptons' kitchen. Rain taught me that phrase, after-action scout. I didn't like it very much, too clean and bland, something worryingly sanitized about the words. Isn't he more of a rear guard? I suggested. Nah, wrong term, Rain said, ruffling my hair. The others were less kind. Vulture, Jing purred. Quite, Christine agreed, arms folded. She regarded our captive with pursed lips and a tight frown. I'm not very well predisposed to this attempt on my home and family, but I've not yet had anybody at which to vent. Dumb arse, said Twill. Twill, her mother scolded. Language. Nobody, Felicity said in her heavy, tired mumble, leaning on Kimberly's support. He's a nobody. He doesn't even have any weapons on him. The mysterious man looked terrified enough as it was and anything but mysterious. Part of me wondered if Christine's initial fear was correct, if we had accidentally assaulted and kidnapped a random woodland rambler who'd stumbled upon what he could only have assumed was a crime scene. But then I recalled how he'd moved. He did look rather like the sort of man who might be out for a solo hike in the deepest woods. In his late 40s or perhaps early 50s, with close-cropped salt and pepper hair and a freshly shaved chin, he had the sort of face one only gets from a lifetime spent outdoors, weathered and craggy, but lean and tight, with an athletic build. His eyes were soft deep blue, his skin tanned, and his fingernails very dirty. He reminded me a tiny bit of my own father, if my dad had been about a 6 stone lighter. Dressed in a camel print coat, sensible trousers, and sturdy boots, he passed muster for a long journey. His pockets and the bag on his back contained nothing out of the ordinary, no weapons, no magical sigils, no hidden compartments, not even after Preem and Rain had rifled through all the contents, and Felicity had done something esoteric with her right hand over his midsection. She said, "Skin's clean too, nothing on him." Evelyn had grunted, "I hate that you do that with no circle. It's obscene." Me too." Rain found his car keys and wallet, the latter contained a driver's license, with his face, and the name, Preston Owl Woods. "Think it's real?" Rain asked. Twill pulled a grimace. "POW. Is this guy bait or what? Must think we're all stupid. Can't we ask him?" Michael said. "We've got him covered in about 6 different ways. He tries anything, his head's gonna burst, right?" "EW. Dad," said Twill. "Well, it's true. And I'm not speaking a word against caution, not after the last couple of hours. You hear me, Mr. Woods? If that's even your real name. We take that gag off your mouth and you better not try anything, because you'll be dead in seconds." Mr. George cleared his throat with great discomfort. "Are we going to have to make this guy talk? Because I don't want to be present for that." "Sorry. Just don't." Rain shot him a wink. "It's cool, we're dab hands at that by now. No help needed." Not the right thing to say. Mr. George went quite pale, staring at Rain. "But I knew the talk was for show, to intimidate our captive. I just wish Rain was a little more delicate about it." Twill was sucking on her teeth. "You don't think he's that guy, do you?" "What guy?" Rain asked. "You know. The guy. Joking. Joe King," I croaked. "No. He was built different. Wrong face too." Evelyn said, "Let me speak to him first, before we try anything rash." Preston Woods watched all this with steadily increasing terror in his wide eyes. Out in the field, Zheng had pinned him to the ground with his face in the mud and knelt on his hands, anti-mage precaution, no words, no gestures. Rain had gagged him, bound his hands and wrapped his fingers in rope, to stop him trying any sneaky magic. After being hauled inside he'd been tied to a chair by his chest and ankles, and now sat, alone, at the center of a ring of strange people, in the gore-streaked ruins of the Hoptons' kitchen. His eyes were wide and wild, his chest pumping beneath his coat and gray jumper. But he was aware, trying to listen to and take in everything we said. I tried to see this all from his perspective. He probably thought he was about to die. Evelyn stepped forward, walking stick in one hand, her other arm wrapped around Preem. She stared at our captive and he stared back, eyes watering. Evelyn spoke slowly and carefully. "We're going to take the gag off your mouth. One of my associates is going to point a gun at your head, but that will be a backup option. hardly necessary. She tapped the floor with her walking stick. Look at this. Preston looked down, at the hastily scrawled magic circle on the patch of clean floor tiles amid the bloodstains. If you try anything, Evelyn continued, this will set your brain on fire and turn your organs to pulp. There is also a monster hanging from the ceiling above your head. It is invisible, you can't see it, but it will murder and digest you at the first sign of trouble. Nod if you understand. Preston Woods nodded. He couldn't see the bubble servitor hanging from the ceiling above his head, a raindrop ready to fall. Twill hissed, bloody hell, Evie. I whispered back in a broken croak, she's just tired. Makes her blunt. Evelyn's tone was colder and more precise than usual, I couldn't disagree with that assessment. I ached to step forward and take her hand, but that would undermine her gravitas and intimidation. Also, I had a pair of gremlins attached to my sides, aim on one, and sevens on the other. 7 shades of silent resumption was in her blood goblin form, heavy-eyed and unsmiling. She'd appeared out of thin air while the others had been busy tying Preston to a chair. She had announced herself by clamping to my side all of a sudden, opposite aim, as if she'd just stepped out from around a corner. I hadn't got a chance to speak with her yet, but she and Aim kept exchanging covert little touches across my back and belly. The pressure of her embrace made my bruises ache, but I wrapped my tentacles tight around her shoulders and clung on. I just accepted the pair of them, and they helped me stand. Evelyn continued, we have just fended off an attempt on our lives. I hope you appreciate the seriousness with which we are treating you. She nodded to Rain. Point the gun at his head. Somebody remove the gag. Twill did the honors, pulling the makeshift gag out of Mr. Wood's mouth. The man just sat there, panting, eyes flicking around at all the staring faces. He swallowed, hard and dry, opened his lips, then thought better of it, and said nothing. Rain laughed softly. You do better to speak, mate. And fast. May I? He said, stammering hard. Not a local accent, something southern perhaps, maybe London. Deep voice, speaking from his chest, level and controlled despite the terror-born stammer. Evelyn snapped, do you speak English as a first language? Answer that question and only that question, or my friend will pull the trigger. Yes or no, either answer will not get you killed. I could see a what forming on his lips and in the crease of his brow, but Preston was fast enough and smart enough to catch himself. Yes, he said. Then speak only English. A single word in another language and we have to kill you, as a precaution. Preston nodded, but I could see in his eyes, he didn't understand. He's not in the know, I murmured. A few of the others looked at me. Evelyn frowned. Rain raised her eyebrows. Kimberly looked away, more focused on helping Felicity than the unfolding interrogation. I cleared my throat and repeated myself. He's not in the know. He doesn't know what's going on. He's not properly aware. Felicity sighed in agreement. He's practically dissociating, she mumbled. Look at his eyes. Preston's pupils were massively dilated. The whites of his eyes were bloodshot with stress. He couldn't focus properly, eyes skipping about the room, over our faces and flinching away from several people, Aim, Sevens, and Zheng. Shit, said Twill. You think? Amanda muttered, little lost lamb. Seen it before. Rain chuckled softly. Little Yellow's got his brain fried. He thought he was talking to somebody, out there with him in the field. Rain glanced at Sevens, who was still clamped to my side, my little blood limpet with her hands under my hoodie. That was your handiwork, right? Gorick, yeah, rasped 7 shades of psychic damage. Can you bring him back around? RRK. Sevens managed to make that gurgle sound very apologetic, and then bury her face in my flank. Aim reached out and touched her shoulder. Mr. Woods. Evelyn stamped once with her walking stick. Bad idea, seeing as she could barely stand. Preen kept her steady. Mr. Woods, whoever you were talking to was not real. Focus on me. Your life depends on focusing on my words. Listen. Michael Hopton muttered from the doorway. Poor bastard. Mr. George murmured in agreement. Twill leaned against the wall and puffed out a sigh. Have we got to break him in? No, I said quickly. No, that would leave him confused for hours, at the very least. And it's not right. It's not right. Yes, Evelyn grunted. We don't have the time. And we have no idea how he would respond. A chest-rattling rasp vibrated against my other flank, like lungs choked with blood-flecked saliva. Aim drew a breath, and said, needs the expert touch. Aim let go of me and stepped forward, a miniature ghost all in black lace. She was half my current support, so Christine Hopton had to quickly step in to hold me up. Aim swept between the gathered people like a scrap of fabric on an errant wind. Before anybody could reach out to stop her, she was right next to Preston and the chair he was tied to. She leaned forward, the side of her hood cupped by one sleeve-drowned hand, and whispered something inaudible into his ear. Preston Woods went completely stiff, then relaxed, blinking rapidly, like a waking sleepwalker. He was still terrified, but now he was concentrating. I'll cooperate, he babbled, lips thick with effort. I'll tell you anything. Everything you want. Please don't shoot me. I'm not important. I'm just doing a job I was paid for. Do you want me to talk, or answer questions, or please? He wet his lips and swallowed. Evelyn frowned at Aim, but then Aim was gone, vanished like a wisp of smoke in damp air. She reappeared attached to Sevens, clinging to her back. The pair of goblins leaned against my side together. Unclogged, said Aim. He'll be GAGA in an hour or two. Work fast, sillies. Please, Preston repeated. Rain said, you're doing great, fella. Just relax. Evelyn snorted. No, how about don't relax? Who are you working for? I don't know who this job is for, Preston said. He focused on Evelyn alone. Something obviously told him that she was the leader, she was the one he needed to convince. It's all via anonymous contacts. All I have is a text message telling me to start and a phone number I'm meant to report back to. It's completely hands-off. You'll find the text message on my phone, it says, Go, 4. That's the code to start. I don't have the report number written down, I have it memorized. I destroyed the piece of paper with it on, this morning. Which I was instructed to do. He spoke crisply and clearly, enunciating his words as best he could, despite the fear for his life. I had the impression he was barely holding back his terror, but he knew his chances were better if he gave us what we wanted. Evelyn and Rain shared a look. Twill sighed. Christine tooted. Michael said, typical. That is his style, Rain said. No contact, no liability, all that. Typical, yes, Evelyn grunted. Twill said, what are you, some kind of cut-rate merc? Preston nodded. Basically, yes. Evelyn sighed. All right. What were you doing here? Preston wet his lips. The job is strictly recon. It was set up a long time ago. I was meant to come to a specific location in the woods and then proceed toward this farm. I didn't know it was a farm. I didn't know what was here. The instructions were to proceed to this point and then report back if anybody was left alive. That's all. Left alive? Michael Hopton said. Yes. Preston took a breath but he couldn't get it all the way down. Nobody's dead. I've seen no bodies. And I've seen no gear, no drugs, no product. So, I'm not aware of anything that's happened here. I don't have to report back. I can pretend I never got the activation message. Twill squinted at him. Drugs? Present blinked rapidly. This is about drugs, right? I know the job must be for a big-scale dealer, but I don't know who. I'm sorry. I know this is a hit on arrival, but I don't know anything else. I'm sorry, I can't give details, it's a no-contact job. I swear. Rain started laughing first. Twill rolled her eyes and flapped her hands. Evelyn looked like she was made of stone. Felicity put her face in her hand. It's not funny. I protested. He's genuinely confused. Funny, said Preem. Come on Heather, Rain said, it's pretty absurd. Michael Hopton said, slowly, he thinks we're what? A hidden growing operation. Drug dealers? You're not then, Preston said. You're not. I saw nothing. I still see nothing. You're not dealers, I never saw any of you. Twill snorted. That ain't the problem here, buddy guy pal. Evelyn sounded like death. This idiot doesn't know a thing. I can give you the number. Preston said, desperate. Poor man thought we were going to shoot him for not knowing anything. I can give you that. Felicity murmured, I want nothing to do with this. Nothing at all. I'm not torturing this man. Evelyn sighed. What's to torture? He knows nothing. Wait a sec, Rain said, stifling her laughter. Mate, listen. Do you know a woman by the name of Amy Stack? Preston Woods froze, mouth on the cusp of an answer. Oh, I breathed. Rain continued, before he could lie to us. Tell us the truth here, friend. It's gonna increase your chances of getting out of here alive. Preston nodded, slowly. His eyes stayed glued to Rain, any port in a storm, even one made of razor-sharp rocks. Yeah. Haven't seen her in 2 years, but Amy's the one who gave me the job, back then. She gave me a phone number where I got the initial instructions, and also gave me the pay. 10,000 up front. I'm supposed to get 10 more on completion, after I report, but it's one of those jobs I never expected to call. Rain cracked a grin, and said, small bloody world, isn't it? Preston didn't know how to respond. I'm reliable. Amy knew that. It's why she got me the contact. 2 years ago. Evelyn asked. Preston nodded. And you haven't seen her since? He nodded again. I think that confirms who the job is really for. Twill said, we trust Stack. Zheng purred, I trust the fox. Yeah, Rain agreed. She's with us. Kind of. Oh, right, said Preston. This fact did not seem to reassure him. Hey, mate, Rain went on quickly, speaking fast. Were you at the library? He stared at her, blindsided. The library? Rain waited. But Preston only swallowed, utterly confused. Evelyn huffed. Yes, he's one of Stack's mercenary contacts, but not the ones Edward used directly. This guy was not taken to Carcosa, or used for anything more. He's a nobody. So, Twill said, what do we do with him? She pulled a grimace. Have we gotta Michael Hopton shook his head, big beefy arms folded over his chest. We can't just let him go. Not after this. Rain winced. Yeah, intel is too valuable to share. Amanda Hopton spoke up as well, but she spoke for her God, this has been too much of a transgression to risk a repeat. He does seem pretty scared, said Twill. She was right, Preston Woods looked terrified. He knew we were debating his death. Felicity said nothing, too busy putting her arms around Kimberly. Kim had her hands over her ears, she didn't want to know anything about this. Please, Preston said. I can give you the number. Talk to Amy, ask Amy, I'm solid. I am. Please don't. Shut up, Evelyn snapped. Everybody shut up. She looked round at the rest of us. I know this has been a rather traumatic day, but please, you all have higher IQs than this. "'Excuse me," said Twill. "This guy is pointless," Felicity murmured. Felicity is correct. To my great surprise, Evelyn grudgingly nodded at her. Edward Lilburn is an extremely mature mage. He doesn't need some hoodwinked courier to confirm if his plan worked or not. This man is nothing worse than independent confirmation, a failsafe. A red herring, perhaps. We could let him go and it wouldn't make any difference. I saw Preston exhale with controlled relief. But we're not going to let him go, Evelyn finished. Evie. I murmured. Evelyn's face blossomed with one of those subtle smiles, knife-thin and devious. Evelyn say the strategist, my strategist, making a move nobody else had thought of. Preem stood tall at her side. She turned back to Mr. Woods, who had gone grey, like rotten oats. You are going to call the number you were given and I am going to make your report. Okay, he said, nodding. All right. I can do that. I will cooperate. Evie, Rain said. What are you thinking? Share with the class, hey. Jing grunted. Wizard filth. Yes, Evie. I echoed. But I was vibrating. Evelyn's satisfaction was contagious. Evie, what are you planning? Evelyn's smile grew sharp and beautiful. Edward Lilburn was always so afraid of hearing my voice over the phone, remember? Well. I'm going to send him a letter bomb. For the second time in one day, Evelyn, Felicity, and Kimberly worked together, but mostly because Evelyn was too exhausted to stand up without leaning on Preem, let alone rip a metaphorical hole in her own metaphysical throat. I am perfectly capable of doing this by myself, for pity's sake, she complained when help was not so much offered as imposed upon her. The theory is simple and sound, it's only going to require a small circle, it's hardly any work. Preem, let me go for. You've never done it before, Felicity said. Neither have you, you cretin. You said it yourself. The theory is simple and sound. I can do it, with Kim's help. Don't act all bloody self-sacrificing. And I want it to be my voice Edward hears before his brain cooks. Preem, let me. Bad Evie, said Preem. Sit down. That settled it, for now. Evelyn was allowed to stay in the kitchen and supervise, though she was placed firmly in a chair while Preem and Felicity drew the magic circle directly onto the floor tiles. Kimberly stood by, mostly to help Felicity get up and down. The room already needed a very serious scrub down, all the nooks and crannies were stained with blood. Nobody would be using that kitchen to cook for a while, not until the bubble servitors had gone over every surface and removed all the biological matter. We all watched the circle take shape, in scraps of filthy blood and swoops of clean chalk. Amanda and Christine drifted away, to aid the bubble servitors in plugging the holes in the building. Michael stayed, arms folded, standing behind our chair-bound captive, presumably in case he tried to gnaw through his bonds. Mr. George excused himself to chain smoke out front. Somebody, I think it was Rain, but I was fuzzy-headed by that point, suggested to Zheng that she should keep watch, play lookout, make sure that Edward Lilburn wasn't going to try for a hat trick. Zheng didn't need much encouragement, she didn't like to linger during magecraft. She ruffled my hair on the way out, purring shaman under her breath. And to my surprise, she ruffled Seven's hair as well, in a strangely affectionate gesture. The little blood goblin didn't even try to bite her. Sevens was too busy pressing her face into my flank and clinging to my side. My support, my limpet. Part of me was desperately aware that Sevens needed me. She'd not said more than a dozen words since returning from her unscheduled and unplanned sneaking session. She was clasped around me as if clinging to a piece of driftwood in the open ocean. Aim was attached to her back as well, but that seemed less urgent. I needed to get Sevens alone, but now was not a good time. While the circle was taking shape, Twill asked, Evie, is this actually going to cook his brain? Cos like, yeah, that's pretty gnarly and he deserves it and all. But is this like, responsible? Rain laughed softly. Since when are you worried about being responsible? Twill shot her a scowl. Hey! Michael Hopton cleared his throat. Our Twill can be very responsible. I'm proud of her. Twill winced as if hit with a brick. Dad, she whined. It's the truth, he said, unashamed. Evelyn sighed heavily from her chair. It was a figure of speech. If mages could kill with a word, the world would be a much more simple place. She added in a quieter voice, if I could kill with a word, it would be a much better place. Evie, I mumbled after trying and failing to tut. Stop being scary. I couldn't help but notice our captive was having trouble following this conversation. Mages and magic were not penetrating the veil of normality around his psyche. He kept blinking too hard. Evelyn cleared her throat and waved me off. Anyway, no. It won't actually kill him. It'll cause him a lot of pain, perhaps a migraine, maybe explosive diarrhea if I'm lucky. What if somebody else? Here's it first. Twill asked. We're not gonna mess up some random merc, right? The spell will key off Edward's recognition of his own full name, Evelyn explained. It shouldn't hurt anybody else. And it will sound like a real report, mostly, to increase the chances he might listen to it himself. Rain sucked on her teeth. And what if he doesn't? Evelyn smiled again, sharp and dangerous. He is expecting a reply to the question, are my enemies still alive? The answer will be a bomb. Do you see the power in that? I want him paranoid. I want him jumping at shadows. I want him so riled up he risks missing the real hit. Twill nodded along, enjoying this. Rustle them jimmies. I dig it. Michael Hopton squinted. Wait a moment. Sorry, Miss Say, but all this is to give our enemy a headache? Rain laughed again. Evie can be amazingly petty. It's one of her best qualities. I agreed with a soft grunt, the best I could muster right then. All my consciousness felt dragged down to the ache in my flank, like a lead weight tugging at my thoughts. Evelyn snapped, if he's dealing with a blinding headache, he's not making clear plans. We want him off balance for as long as possible. Need I remind everyone that we still don't know where his home is? We have to buy time, for. Her eyes flickered to me, to hunched and pained little Heather Morel, propped up by a fake vampire and a black lace demon. She wouldn't say it out loud, but I knew the truth, Evie needed to buy time for me. The fastest method of locating Edward Lilburn, now that the veil was lifted, was always going to be hyperdimensional mathematics. In theory I could walk out the front door right now, step over to the pile of dead canine corpses, and use one of them to trace the web of interaction in creation and meaning all the way back to the mage himself. Assuming he was responsible for them, of course. But it was a solid bet that we could tug on that thread and eventually find him at the other end of it. But my body wasn't working right. My bioreactor had overheated, self-shut down, or just plain broken. I had no idea what brain math would do to me right now. Evelyn knew that, but she wouldn't say it out loud. We had other methods, of course. Jing could go hunting, maybe with Twill at her side. Cringe-Windla's angels were already fanning out into the woods, but they could hardly cover all the countryside between here and Stockport. Given enough time we could search for the house the old-fashioned way, on foot. But brain math would be fast, brain math would solve the problem, brain math would do in minutes what would otherwise take days. And brain math might burn through my abdomen. Evelyn never finished that sentence. As her eyes lingered on me, Rain stepped in for her. Yeah, we gotta buy time. We're in no shape for another fight, not like this. Evelyn squinted at her. That's not like you. Twill chuckled. Yeah, speak for yourself, Rain. I could go another round. Sure you could, Rain said with a grin. Meanwhile, I think we should negotiate. Negotiate, said Michael Hopton. Rain. I said, actively horrified. She shrugged. You're exhausted, Heather. Evie, Fliss, Kim, all spent. Nikki's got a broken leg, she's out. I'm almost out of bullets. What are we gonna do if we find the house now? Go running in for a frontal assault. Swarm it with bubble lads, said Twill. Come on, Rain. What are you talking about? But Rain was serious. Yeah, please do. But then we're heading home. Evie stamped with her walking stick, a gesture which almost toppled her out of her chair. Preem leapt up from working on the circle and caught her. Evelyn snapped out, we are not having a strategy meeting right now, Rain. Yeah, Rain said, perfectly level and perfectly calm. We're not. Decision is already made. We gotta rest, Evie, even if just to recover for a day or two. How are we gonna press this? What's the plan? Evelyn pursed her lips. She shot a look at Preston, tied to his chair, but he looked lost. We are not talking about this now, Evelyn snapped. Rain cracked a grin. We're overextended. We haven't even left this house. It's a metaphor. Evelyn snapped, well it's a shit one. Twill spoke up, intensely awkward. Hey, calm down, yeah. Evie, I murmured. I can't, I'm sorry. But I can't. And you told me to rest. Evelyn froze in a way she so rarely did, catching herself on the edge of a precipice, horror behind her eyes as she stared at me. She swallowed, then had to cling to Preem's arm for several long seconds, despite the fact she was already sitting down quite comfortably. That's true, she murmured, looking away from me. True. We'll finish this spell, then talk. Make a new plan. Yes. Rain shot me a wink. A victory, but not one I enjoyed. Eventually that magic circle drove me out of the kitchen, with Sevens in tow. The circle burned my eyes like a magnesium flare. At first it was fine, just marks on the floor, a little uncanny but no worse than any other magic circle which had ever made me feel vaguely unwell. But when Felicity and Preem were just over halfway done, the symbols seemed to spark and burn inside my brain. Nobody else suffered that effect, this wasn't errant magic or an unintended side effect. I was seeing the purpose beneath the symbolism. The eye's gift. Go sit down. Evelyn snapped at me when I covered my eyes and groaned. You're going to give yourself a migraine by watching. But you're so tired. And so are you. Evelyn sighed sharply. Somebody make Heather sit down, please, because I can't even stand up. Rain. Rain, take her into the sitting room and make sure she doesn't wander back in here and burn out her retinas. Heather, rest, for pity's sake, or I will do this magic myself. I obeyed with a little helping hand from Rain. She led me back into the shattered sitting room. Sevens clung to me the whole way. Aim clung to her back. We made a very silly conga train from the kitchen to the sofa in the dining room, but I was too wiped out to care, too exhausted for self-consciousness. Rain got me settled on the sofa. Seven burrowed into my flank, hard and tight. Aim sat on her opposite side, one hand resting against Seven's narrow thigh. I recalled putting my head back and closing my eyes, but only once I made sure Sevens was anchored with 3 tentacles and she wasn't going anywhere. Consciousness drifted back and forth, a veil parting and closing over my face. Part of me assumed Rain had stood up and gone back into the kitchen, but then I felt a cool, soft, dry hand on my forehead, brushing my hair back. Only a handful of seconds had passed. Rain's hand withdrew. She whispered, "She asleep?" I was about to answer, dredging my voice from drowsiness. But Seven spoke first. "Dunno," came the rasping voice from somewhere down near the base of my ribcage, nuzzled against the roots of my tentacles. "Maybe." "Heather?" Rain whispered. A rare and impish impulse bade me stay quiet. I allowed myself to drift instead of answer. "Guess that's a yes," Rain whispered. Sevens replied with a gurgling mm. How about you, Yellow? How you holding up? Silence. Sevens shifted against my side. My bruises sang a bitter chorus. I felt a gentle prick of sharp teeth, muzzled by the fabric of my hoodie. Somehow that made the bruises fade. The teeth withdrew. Need a rusk? Rain whispered with a grin in her voice. I'd never heard her speak so gently, despite her choice of terminology. Silence returned for several moments. I almost drifted deeper, beyond sound. I could hear Evelyn's voice in the kitchen, muffled by the wall and the door, and then a reply, perhaps from Felicity. Rain must have pulled up a chair, because I heard a creak of damaged wood, followed by a gentle sigh. I could smell the iron tang coming off Sevens and something else below that, like sweat or pheromones. You want to talk about it? Rain whispered. In front of Aim. Heard inside, Sevens rasped softly. I almost broke cover, almost opened my eyes and sat up and hugged her around the shoulders and pulled her into my lap and kissed her on the forehead. She sounded so spent and tired. 7 shades of sad and slow. Because you helped us? Rain whispered. Because hey, thank you. You kept that guy distracted, right? Led him forward for us. Who were you being? Nobody, came the mumbled reply. Never done that before. Aim said, she bent herself a way she's not meant to bend. All for you people. My heart ached so terribly. I wanted to cry but I was too tired. Rain reached forward, I could feel her hand displacing the air. Sevens let out a tiny squeak, then a noise of breathy surprise, then a purr, high and soft and vibrating against my side. Don't hurt yourself for us, Rain whispered. Don't hurt yourself for anybody, yeah. Had to for Heather. Nope. Wrong. Not true. Anybody who asks you to hurt yourself for them, they're not worth being hurt for. If Heather was awake, and I suspect she might be, she's going to feel pretty bad about that. Trying to be whole. That drew another little sigh from Rain. But I could feel the comforting grin in her words, I could see it in my mind's eye, the warmth and acceptance. Sevens, you're trying to be a person. But you don't make yourself whole by hurting yourself. That's how people make less of themselves, not more. Sevens' purring turned heavy. She burrowed back against my side, escaping Rain's petting. Aim spoke through a bundle of whispering knives. Be just peachy if Heather would tell her that. Rain said, I don't think this is Heather's fault. But Rain was wrong. This was my fault. Sevens had gone out there and broken all the rules about the masks she could wear, and why, and when, and what they could be related to. She had turned herself into something original, a fresh creation, a void, a mind trick to distract Edward's cheap little mercenary, because she thought it was necessary to help protect me, to look after me, to further my cause. She had bent herself into a shape she did not want to occupy, an act of self-redefinition which hurt her soul. She'd gotten it all wrong, because of me. Was this because I'd kissed her earlier, before the fight started? Because I showed her a scrap of real affection? I did not want her self-sacrifice. I would not allow it. I was having none of this. Without even thinking about my actions, I started the brain math. I plunged my hands into the black tar and the boiling mud and the soupy mass of toxic waste, and I pulled out machines of such precision and complexity that to look upon them would burn out the eyeballs of an unaltered human being. I began to cast the net, to define everything between here and Stockport, to turn the countryside into an equation which I could unravel in my hands. I would pluck out the grid of Edward Lilburn's house. I'd seen maps of the area, I could imagine it, that would have to do. Imprecise and power-hungry as a method, but it would work, now Edward's walls were down. Damn the consequences, because the consequence right now was Sevens in pain. My flank started to burn, my bioreactor was still recovering, still in emergency shutdown, still not ready to fire. But I tried anyway, running the maths red hot without any cooling, without any source of energy but my own glucose and calories and body fat. I would knock myself out for a week to spare Sevens another hour of dislocation and dissociation and dysphoria. Poised on the edge of the cliff, I made ready to dive. And then 7 shades of sharp little slicers opened her mouth and bit into my forearm. 7 shades of sanguivore possessed the most wonderfully sharp little teeth I'd ever seen on any creature, outsider or otherwise. Each tooth was a smooth white pointed needle. They looked as if they had evolved specifically to punch through a steel gorget and penetrate the living meat inside, to cut channels in flesh for blood to flow free. She was tiny and twisted and weird, but also beautiful in her own way. But when she opened her mouth she was beautiful, like a blade was beautiful, sharp and dangerous and elegant all at once. Sevens wore her blood goblin mask as a habitual lounging form, when at home and comfortable and safe, but the sight of those teeth always reminded me that the mask was based on a real person, a vampire, who had once been called Julija, and had used those teeth to drink blood from human throats. 7 shades of stunning snap slammed those razor-tipped teeth tight around my forearm, right at the climax of a brain math equation. She sliced straight through the fabric of my pink hoodie and the cloth of 2 different t-shirts, cut into my flesh like a handful of scalpels, and clamped down hard around my ulna and radius. I felt enamel scrape my bones. I crashed out of the hyperdimensional mathematics harder than ever before. It was like being ripped away from a cliff edge by a none too gentle Rottweiler. All the carefully balanced infernal machinery in heavenly mathematics of the eye came crashing down around me, unstable scaffolding smashing into my mind and sending me reeling, crushing me to the floor, breaking bones, pulping flesh. My eyes shot open. I was back on the sofa in the Hoptons' ruined sitting room, heaving for breath, coughing and hacking and retching, my vision blurred with black and red. I groped for rain and clung on tight with 2 tentacles, a drowning woman clutching a piece of driftwood. My nose filled with blood and dripped onto the front of my hoodie. I made no effort to hold that back. Why bother? I was already filthy with blood and worse from the fight with the outsiders. I whined and spat and shook as the equation rolled back onto me. Waves of pain lanced up through my eyeballs and set my brain on fire. But my bioreactor stayed cold. My mind, my soul, myself, all of it flinched and jerked away from the fire of hyperdimensional mathematics, but my body was spared the damage. Meanwhile, 3 other tentacles were trying to peel Sevens off my arm. Abyssal instinct was screaming. So was regular, normal, terrestrial instinct. The clever ape part of me was very concerned that a jaw was latched around my flesh and was willing to do almost anything to unlatch it. A paradoxical balance held me back. The ape wanted to punch Sevens in the face, but abyssal instinct would not allow me to harm a member of my pack, my group, mine. My memory of the next few seconds was a jumble of my yowling, mostly drowning out Rain's voice. She spoke as if trying to calm a skittish horse. AIM was giggling like crazy. Eventually, I came back to myself, my senses bleeding through the haze of pain and confusion. I turned my head and looked at Sevens, through the sheet of tears in my eyes and the black throbbing in my peripheral vision. I laughed. I didn't mean to. All my emotions and responses were so jumbled up. She just looked so silly. Sevens was clamped to my arm like a tiny, irritated dog, her face all smushed up by the position. Her own eyes were a pair of black-red lamps staring at me over her distended jaw, and she was burning with anger. I hissed right in her face, interrupting my own hiccuping laugh, which I'm certain was an absolutely awful sound. 3 of my tentacles were wrapped around her head and throat and shoulders, trying to pry her off. But I wasn't willing to exert enough strength to hurt her, no matter how much damage she'd done to my arm. Rain was speaking slowly and calmly. Sevens, hey, let go, hey. You're distressing Heather. Come on, girl, that's it, let go, come on. How could Rain stay so collected? My arm, her girlfriend's arm, was practically bitten off, streaming with blood, stabbed by 24 tiny knives. My sense of reality slipped sideways, smothered by pain and confusion. Another voice appeared in the doorway. Kimberly, soft and wary. Is everything okay? Rain answered with an awkward smile. We're just having a moment. No worries. I reared up like a cornered serpent, gritting my teeth, about to spit. No worries. My voice probably would have sent poor Kimberly scurrying to hide under the nearest bed. But Aim was waiting for me. She was a black hood peering over Seven's shoulder. No face within, just a blank emptiness where a person should have been, the outline of a being, the suggestion of form beneath endless layers of black lace. A dead leaf whisper scraped inside my ear canals. Okay, I squeezed out through gritted teeth to Sevens, not to Aim. Stop, stop. Sevens, let go, I won't do it again, I won't do it again, I'll stop. With all the reluctance of a wild animal, 7 shades of snapping turtle opened her jaw. I felt needle points scrape my bones, knives slide out through my flesh, and teeth pop free from bleeding wounds. Sevens ruined the dramatic moment when she had to use one hand to awkwardly free her teeth from the fabric of my hoodie. I snatched my arm back and instinctively cradled it to my chest, my free hand wrapping around. Unbroken flesh. I made a noise that made me sound very stupid. Yanking my sleeve up did not reveal bone-deep gashes and rivers of blood amid ribboned skin, but just bruises and some light grazing. Sevens had punctured my clothes, which was bad enough, but she hadn't even bitten down hard enough to draw blood. Wah! Aim giggled again, a sound to curdle milk. She had a little help from a friend. I boggled at the pair of them. Sevens ducked her eyes and wriggled back into the sofa cushions as if trying to burrow between them and vanish into the ground. She rubbed at her jaw with one hand. Aim, a stick of black lace with no visible features, just sat there looking inherently smug. How could lace be smug? I bled from the nose and tried not to think too hard about that. Rain raised her voice slightly and backed it with steel. All right then, ladies, girls, ghouls, and others. One of you is going to explain to me what I just witnessed. She turned her head briefly. Kim, would you be a dear and fetch a glass of water and some tissues for Heather? Looks like we had a little accident. Maybe some painkillers, too. Dunno if those are in high demand at the moment. Ask Evie for some of hers. Please. Sevens rasped, her fault. Speaking through a glugging nosebleed, a post-math headache, and a lake of burning embarrassment, I said, I was trying to do brain math. I was trying to help. Sevens. 7 shades of sad-eyed sulking wouldn't look at me. She even pouted. Aim agreed with her. Your fault, little Miss Messiah Complex. Know when to stay down. Hey, Rain said, suddenly sharp. Only I get to tell her that. Sevens gurgled. Shut up. Aim, shut up. But she also draped herself over Seven's shoulders, wrapping the blood goblin in a close embrace, cheek to cheek. Sevens looked at her own lap and grumbled. Kimberly returned with a glass of water, a box of tissues, and one Evelyn-issued pill. We didn't seem to have attracted any further attention. I could still hear Evelyn talking in the kitchen and Felicity replying to her, punctuated by the occasional comment from Twill or her father. So I couldn't have been hissing or yowling that loud, I was too exhausted to make much noise. Rain made me drink the water, which helped flush out the taste of bile and blood, and take the painkiller, which wouldn't help much for several minutes yet. Then she wiped the blood off my face. The nosebleed was trailing off now, my senses clearing, my embarrassment rearing up to defend itself. Sevens, I spluttered again as Rain tried to wipe my lips. Why did you do that? I was trying to help. 7 shades of sulking went. Goowork. Don't gurk at me. I snapped. Rain gently took my face in one hand, turning me back to her. Hey, Heather, slow down, she said. But I wasn't listening. I pulled free and frowned at Sevens again. Sevens. I'm serious. She rasped low in her throat. You were going to hurt yourself. And you had already hurt yourself. How am I supposed to sit by and let you? Rain's voice hit me like a whip across the buttocks. Heather. I flinched. A full-body jerk, tentacles included, flailing about like a surprised octopus. Rain had gone past command and straight to angry with me, in a way she'd never been before. Abyssal instinct went soft and floppy, urging me to roll onto my back and expose my belly. The steel in her eyes, the set of her shoulders, the implied impending punishment, all of it made me want to curl up and submit. I looked right back at her and let out a completely unintentional, unbidden, unthinkable little whine. Then I blushed, mortified at myself. Rain, I'm as sorry, It's okay, Heather, she purred, switching gears in an instant. She reached forward to brush my hair away from my eyes. Just stop shouting at Sevens, hey. Don't make me carry you to the car and put you in timeout. Look, you've even spooked poor Kim over there. Rain nodded sideways, but Kimberly was very pointedly staring at her, not me. I suspected she'd suffered some spillover from the vocal whip crack. Maybe she wanted Rain to tell her off just like that. Said Kim, eyes wide and visibly sweating. I should maybe go back in the kitchen. Yes. Kitchen. Spells. Yes. Kim excused herself, leaving me alone again with Rain, Sevens, and Aim. I'm sorry, I murmured, though I wasn't sure who I was apologizing to, Rain, or Sevens. Rain pulled a beaming smile, the kind of encouragement and love she kept on tap just for me. She nodded slowly, the sort of nod that said nothing but let me know she understood everything. She leaned back and blew out a long breath, ran one hand through her rich chestnut hair, and rolled her shoulders inside her leather jacket. Part of me couldn't help but admire how good she looked, sitting there in a chair with one leg thrown over the other. If I was to be interrogated, I would want Rain to be handling me. She said, how about nobody hurts themselves for anybody else, okay? The ghost of a strange anger lurked still inside the curves and planes of her face, a secret geography I'd rarely witnessed. I nodded. Okay. Rain, why are you I sighed. Oh, I'm being a fool, aren't I? I don't need to ask why you're angry. Rain shrugged. I don't like it when my girls hurt themselves. I spluttered, your girls? Rain. Sevens made a snorty noise. Means me too. Well, yes. I said. I assumed that was the meaning. Rain shot us a broad wink. Nobody hurts my girls, not even themselves. So come on, Heather, what was that all about? And Sevens, what was the bite for? I sighed, mostly at myself. The bite was because I was being a fool. I told the truth. I overheard what Sevens was saying, about twisting herself into a new shape, to bait that man for us. And I didn't want her to hurt herself for that. I turned to Sevens, to the scrap of huddled pale flesh and black fabric snuggled down on the sofa next to me. Sevens, nobody asked you to do that, please don't. Sevens just grunted. Rain cleared her throat. And then you. I began the brain math to find Edward's house. I turned and held her gaze, feeling oddly defiant. Don't tell me that I shouldn't have done it. We have to find him, Rain, we can't let this go on any longer. Rain's turned to sigh, through her grin. Heather, we don't have a lot of choices. We're tapped out. Sevens hurt herself just to deal with some stupid red herring thing. We can't let up now, Rain, we can't. We have to keep the pressure on, we have to go find him and. Rain kinked an amused frown at me. You're sounding like Evie. And I don't think you really believe that. Heather, even if you find his house right now, we aren't gonna be able to do shit. I just went through all this with Evie, and I know you were listening and paying attention. You pay attention to almost everything. We're tapped out and we need to rest, even if just for a day. Do you agree with me, or not? Rain. She repeated, soft and calm, do you agree with me, or not? I do. But I feel so guilty. I had to try. I can't just sit by and let everybody else I have to be. An angel? I didn't say the words. It sounded too silly. But what good was a dead angel? Sevens rasped, you were going to burn a hole in your gut. I turned, ready to snap at Sevens again. Part of me was still deeply confused by the bite, angry yet excited. Part of me wanted her to do it again. Another part of me wanted to wrap her up in cotton wool and take her home and feed her soup. Another part of me wanted to shove my throat between her fangs. Part of me wanted to shout at her. It was too much. But Sevens was finally looking up at me, with those red-on-black eyes in that mushroom-pale face, framed by dark, lank hair. My residual anger fizzled out to nothing. I followed my better instincts and wrapped her in a hug, though I was weak and bruised and couldn't exert much strength. Everything ached. She pressed herself into my front. Tiny hands found my shoulders and held on tight. You were gonna hurt yourself, she mumbled into my shoulder. I felt like I had to. Please, Sevens, don't damage yourself for my sake. I'm sorry. For shouting at you. For getting angry with you. You were right, but why a bite? You could have just said something to me. Everyone else has said it to you and you still won't stop. My heart ached. I'm sorry, I said. I'm not, said Sevens. Not for biting. Well, I suppose I deserved it. Fools, the lot of you, Aim whispered. I shot her a tiny glare, but I couldn't tell if she was even looking. Rain cleared her throat. I think we need some new ground rules for you too. Sevens and I both looked round, huddled against each other. Rain. What do you mean? Nobody asked for any self-sacrifice. Same thing I was saying to Sevens before. Hurting yourself never makes you whole. I huffed a little laugh. Rain, I am not trying to start a fresh argument, but that's a bit rich coming from you, isn't it? Rain's grin blossomed wide. I've never self-sacrificed. I gave her a frown. But Sevens said, she hasn't. She hasn't. Rain shrugged. Not in the way either of you just tried to. And the way I was doing it, Heather taught me to stop doing that. I love you, and I don't want you to hurt yourself, and you just tried to push yourself way too far. So it's time for a new rule, no self-sacrifice. You love Sevens, right? The question hit me like a brick to the gut, especially after the rest of what Rain said. I sat there like a fish for at least 5 seconds, just staring at her with my mouth open. Rain, is this really the best time for this conversation? Aim clucked her tongue, I wasn't sure what that meant. I glanced around at what was left of the Hopton sitting room, the blood-soaked carpets, the missing door filled with bubble servitors, the table splintered in half, several destroyed chairs, and the huge twin stains on the floor and up one wall, where the outsiders had died and slowly turned to biological mush. Bubble servitors were everywhere, soaking up and digesting biomatter, turning red inside as they processed the gore. This was not exactly the location one imagined for this kind of difficult little chat. I glanced at Aim too, unreadable inside her black lace refuge, but somehow I knew she was looking at me like something she'd discovered on the bottom of her shoe. Rain laughed gently. It's exactly the time for this conversation, because you just tried to go all Chernobyl with your super appendix, and yellow brat here squeezed into a disguise several sizes too small. You're both at fault and neither of you are allowed to do that again. Aim spoke up, a dry and metallic sound like a steel comb rasping over rocks. Says who? Rain sat forward, aiming her whole body toward the little demon. Her grin turned into a challenge. Says me. Heather has to look after herself, see, because if she doesn't, then I'll punish her. I felt my face flush. Rain, really? Ha, said Aim. And Sevens? Does she have to follow your orders too? Rain stared at that blob of black lace, as if she was looking at a clear and unveiled face. She does what Heather says. Isn't that right, Heather? Did I have the right to tell Sevens to do anything? A barb of sharp and acid guilt twisted inside my chest. I thought I'd known what Sevens needed. I thought I was giving her space and time to redefine herself, giving her the quiet and unconditional support she needed to go through whatever process she was going through. But Sevens was not a human being struggling with her sense of self-worth or direction in life or sexuality. She was an outsider, the yellow princess, a thing of gossamer butterscotch beauty stretched across the currents and ebbs of the abyss. She had fallen in love with me, given me a piece of herself, and then stayed by my side. What did love mean to a being like her? I thought I was doing the right thing, but she'd just hurt herself for my sake, thrown herself on a spike that nobody else could perceive, let alone understand. The idea of Sevens hurting herself for my sake was offensive to me. Snuggled against my side, Sevens was watching my face. Could she read my thoughts as I decided what to do about her? Did I love 7 shades of sunlight? Perhaps. I cared about her well-being. I didn't want her to hurt herself. But she had done exactly that, after I had shown her the barest hint of real physical affection and offered her a few words of comfort. Sevens bumped her head against my shoulder, exactly like a cat. What is love if not the sum of care? I could not tell Sevens I loved her. Maybe I did, but if that later turned out to be a lie, I could never forgive myself. But there was something I could do, a truth I could tell. A strange impulse overtook me, a piece of abyssal instinct rising inside my gut like a wave of hormones I so rarely acknowledged. Sevens. She flinched. Something in my tone forced that flinch out of her, as water is forced from a sponge with a hard squeeze. The instinct in my abdomen squirmed in pleasure at that. Before I could second-guess my gut feelings, I grasped 7 shades of naughty puppy with 3 tentacles, 1 around each arm, and a 3rd around her throat. I gripped lightly, gentle and soft, and peeled her away from aim. She squeaked and froze as I leaned down until we were face to face. I have no idea how I wasn't blushing. Rain froze too, just watching. Sevens went silent and still, a mouse before a snake. You do not have my permission to hurt yourself, I said to Sevens. My voice was cool and level, but inside I was squeaking and flailing about, trying to piece this together as I went. I care about you very much. You made yourself mine. So you need my permission to hurt yourself. No. Bad Sevens. Bug-eyed, red-eyed, black orbs stared back at me. Sevens opened her mouth and let out a breathy little hiss between 2 rows of needle teeth. I hissed back without even thinking about it, soft and low. Then I leaned in and planted a little kiss on the corner of her thin lips. There was nothing erotic about the gesture or the brush of contact between our mouths. We were more like a pair of animals, one licking the other's face to establish a pecking order. Sevens shivered and shook and then curled up against my side, coiling within my tentacles. Good girl, I murmured, the hormones and the bravado passing together. Now I was blushing like a beetroot. Had I really said all that? Rain was grinning wide. She shot me a thumbs up. I rolled my eyes and huffed and tried to drain the blood back out of my cheeks. But alas, abyssal biochemical control did not extend to manually switching off my own blush. Ew, said AIM. Bleh. Sick. Vile. Pah. I almost reared up and snapped at her for ruining the moment, but then from within my arms, nestled against my bruises, Sevens said, jealous. A little, said AIM. Snug as a bug in a rug. AIM turned her faceless hood upward. I'm always snug. More like smug. We're rhyming now. Sevens went all sing-song. I never rhyme without a rhyme. A rhyme of salt on sailors' beards. Where is this going, princess? Sevens shrugged. You can be a princess too. Just have to ask. Princess-in-law is not the same. Law is all there is to any princess. Ha! Aim barked like the slap of a rusty drum. The abyssal goblins fell silent. I just held Sevens, rather confused but unwilling to take the risk of asking. Rain was braver than I. She said, "You two sound pretty esoteric sometimes." Sevens blinked at her, genuinely surprised. Aim just tilted her head as if Rain was a moron. I cleared my throat, hoping to return the conversation to ground level. "Sevens, can I ask you a question?" She nodded into my side. "You deserve self-definition, not whatever it was you did to yourself out there. But I still don't understand what you actually did. I couldn't even see you, you were invisible. What happened?" Sevens grumbled, then set about wriggling free from my grip. She slipped out of my tentacles and stepped off the sofa. She tripped forward 3 paces, walking on bare feet with dirty soles, then stopped and did a little spin. The blood goblin vampire mask vanished, replaced by the yellow princess in all her starched and pressed glory, with perfect creases in her blouse and a ruler straight line in her skirt. The tip of her umbrella pressed into the carpet. Aim made a noise like blurp. Abyssal instinct recognized this as either submission, or attraction, or maybe relief. I wasn't sure which. It wasn't a fully human emotion. 7 shades of icy superiority settled herself in place. "I wore no mask," she said. "I wove a face from muscle memory, a mask of skin and bone. I made our brief guest a visitation from a friend long dead, plucked from his life in the manner my father might remake an old rival, or a lost brother, or a dead child. I put one hand to my mouth. Oh. Oh, Sevens. Oh no." Sevens bowed her perfect haircut toward me. "It was an act of torture and cruelty. Mr. Preston Woods will weep alone, in the dark, lost. He will suffer dreams and nightmares of a meeting which did not really happen, with a dear friend who was shot in a faraway place, a decade ago. He is unmoored in time. I have done this thing, to himself and me." "Sevens," I sighed. I reached toward her, but I was too exhausted to rise. "And I apologize to you," she said. "Because I have no right." "Apology accepted," I said softly. "Unconditionally." Sevens merely nodded. "Thank you, my angel." I blushed again. "Maybe don't call me that." Aim snorted, a very unpleasant sound. I shot a glance at her. "Did you have anything to do with encouraging this?" A blind black hood turned toward me. "Encouraging? Sweetest of butter-baked fools. She should have used it for herself, not for you." "Aim," said Sevens, cold as metal in winter and just as painful to the touch. Aim flinched hard, jerking in place and then withdrawing slightly. "No," added Sevens. "Gah!" Aim hissed at her. Okay. But only for you." "Only for me is more than enough," said Sevens. "You're lucky you're so hot," Aim burbled. Rain was biting her lip in a failed attempt to suppress a grin, an expression like she was watching a soap opera up close. My eyes were wide and my imagination was on fire. I cleared my throat. I said. "Not that it's any of my business if you don't want to share, but you two have been very close and I was wondering." Aim giggled. "You're right. It is none of your business, squid stink." Seven said, crisp and clear, "Aim and I enjoy one another's company." Aha, Aim agreed. "Aim is more than she appears." Aha. "Well yes," I said, blushing. "I realize that, but what I'm asking is." Rain broke in, speaking with all the beaming confidence of a lorry barreling straight into a stop sign. "Heather is trying to ask if you've got a side piece, princess. Gotta fess up if you have. Polly rules and all." "Not telling," said Aim at the exact same moment Seven said, "Technically yes." They looked at each other. "Technically?" Aim screeched. Sevens was unmoved. Would you prefer no? Aim melted into the sofa, vanishing like a scrubbed-out stain and reappearing at Seven's side like a mushroom growing in fast forward, holding her free hand. Sevens tilted her head sideways and blinked, the most she ever came to giving ground. It is different for beings like us. Hey, Rain said. As long as you're having fun. I nodded at that and then leaned back into the sofa, closing my eyes with bone-crushing exhaustion. As long as you're still here, I murmured, struggling not to drift away, one hand on my right flank, just over the cold lump of my bioreactor. 7 shades of questionable definitions purred for me, we're not going anywhere, kitten. At Rain's behest and with Evelyn's grudging acceptance, we held a strategy meeting. We had to wait until Evelyn had finished sending her letter bomb, of course. I overheard only part of that grisly process, sitting on the sofa with Sevens at my side and Aim clinging to her opposite arm. Rain ventured back into the kitchen briefly, to see how the bomb-making was moving along, but she was shooed out along with the rest of the non-mages when the time came to connect the wiring and plug in the metaphorical alarm clock with the exception of Preem and Mr. Preston Woods, of course. Felicity did the talking. We all heard that, even with the kitchen door firmly closed. Zheng probably heard it too, off at the far end of the field. Even Fringewindla may have heard it, miles underground. Preston Woods made the beginning of his report, a muffled voice talking about all clear, nobody left alive, among other such bland horrors. But then Felicity cut into the middle of his sentence, with words not meant for a human throat. Evelyn had explained that the spell was keyed to Edward Lilburn's recognition of his own name, but it made me feel sick and wrong. It made Rain sway in her chair and Amanda Hopton sit down heavily as she entered the room. It made Twill burp, loudly, twice. It made Jing reappear at the doorway, baring her teeth. It made Mr. George place an unlit cigarette in his mouth and start chewing it to pieces. Each syllable made reality blink and shudder like a tortured animal backed into a corner. When the mages were finished, Felicity joined us in the sitting room. Her nose was bleeding, her skin was gray, and her eyes were unfocused. She sat down in a blood-stained chair and stared at the floor, dead-eyed and so motionless that I thought she might stop breathing. Kimberly wobbled out after her, significantly less ruined, then stood behind the chair and gently rubbed Felicity's back, wordlessly affectionate. Evelyn came out last, grumpy and exhausted as ever. She would have collapsed if not for Preem's arm. Evie, I breathed with muted affection. She looked how I felt. Oh, Evie, you have to rest. We all do. Yeah, Rain agreed slowly, drawing the word out. We gotta talk about that, I think. Discuss our next move, yeah. Christine Hopton cleared her throat, she had drifted in along with Amanda. I agree wholeheartedly. Our guest needs water, Evelyn croaked. And plug his ears, if we're going to talk. Twill perked up at that, eyebrows climbing her forehead. Does that mean we're going to let him go? Evelyn sighed. Unless you can find a justification for murdering him. I suppose we should talk about that too. Get to it. Preem, set me down somewhere. Here, I said, patting the sofa next to me, on the opposite side to Sevens. With me, please, Preem. Put her with me. Evelyn offered no complaint. She settled down against my side like a shipwreck victim in a tiny boat, lashed by storm winds and the cruelty of salt water. Her head on my shoulder was shelter from the elements. She almost fell asleep, held awake only by an iron force of will that I admired so very much. There simply wasn't anywhere left in the house untouched by blood and combat and bits of broken door. The bubble servitors were doing an admirable job of cleaning up already. There were great streaks and patches of clean carpet and scoured wall where they had passed, like massive semi-translucent slugs leaving behind reverse slime trails. But their progress was slow and no other room was any better, so we naturally gathered in the sitting room, all of us, everybody who was left. As fortune would have it, Benjamin called from Sherrowford General Hospital as we were dragging ourselves together. Michael took the call on his mobile phone. Detective Webb's in the AE right now, he informed us afterward. Ben and Katie are gonna stick around there for her. Doctors don't seem too worried. Bad break, but fixable. Sucks for her, Twill said. Mean it. No Sarky, yeah. Rain said, she was incredibly brave. We owe her a thank you. What do you think she drinks? Bottle o' whiskey. Twill suggested. Christine cleared her throat. I think we owe Miss Webb unlimited and unconditional taxi rides for the next few months, until her leg is healed. Hear, hear, muttered Evelyn, eyes half closed. After the phone call, Rain stood up and took charge. It was a strange sight, as all eyes turned toward her in that shattered sitting room, great slug masses of bubble servitor moving over every wall, half of us exhausted beyond words and the other half still shell-shocked. Amanda Hopton was sitting in a hastily recovered chair, eyes and nose gone red as if suffering flu symptoms. Out beyond the cling film bubble servitor door plug, more of the angels were gathering in the field. I watched them with idle curiosity. Were they digesting the dog corpses, or burying them? Rain clapped her hands together. Ladies and gentlemen, NBs and others, humans and demons and mages alike. And Fringe Windla, if he's listening, I think we're done for the day. I braced myself for Evelyn to sit up and start arguing. In fact, I may have joined in with her. I wasn't sure which way I was leaning on this question. Sevens was right, I was spent, but could we really afford to slow down now? But Evelyn just sighed and grumbled. She did sit up straighter, just enough to glare at Rain, but without any of her usual fire. Evie. I said. Another sigh, then, I'm forced to agree. Rain is right. We're not in good condition. I hate this, but we need to regroup, for now. A dark rumble interrupted us. Zheng, leaning against the wall with her arms folded and her eyes narrowed to slits. She rumbled like a volcano god denied her offerings. Several people flinched, Christine and Michael Hopton, Twill, Mr. George, and Kimberly. When Kim flinched, Felicity struggled upright and put a hand on her arm. Aim hissed, as if rolling her eyes. Preem stared at Zheng. Left hand. Rain said. You got a problem? Complaint? Suggestion? Come on, we're all being open here, don't just sound angry and then stop. Wizards, Zheng rumbled. Like mold. Leave the hunt half finished and they will regrow. We have not even begun, little wolf. Expected better from you. Christine Hopton cleared her throat. That's hardly fair. Another growl cut her off. Hey, Rain said, spreading her arms. Zheng. Look at us. Evie and Heather can't walk. Felicity looks like she just recovered from a wasting disease. I've been over this once already. You and me and Twill, we're fighting fit, sure, but we need the DPS to go with the tanks. If we found Edward right now, what would we even do? Zheng looked like she was carved from a block of stone. Rip off his head and devour his guts. I will eat his flesh, little wolf. No scrap of wizard goes into the ground, nothing escapes. I feel you there, said Rain. Very poetic. Very emphatic. But we're talking practical stuff, not fitting ends. What are you gonna do by yourself? I can carry the shaman. Not right now, you don't. Zheng levered herself up off the wall, towering over everyone else in the room, baring her teeth. Was that her body heat I felt, radiating from several feet away? No, just my imagination. You are smart and strong and swift, little wolf, but you are thinking too much like a mage. I will carry the shaman into anything, she need only ask. I said, out loud, I can't do this. Everyone looked at me. I sighed softly and drew an exhausted hand over my face, then repeated myself, eyes squeezed shut. I can't do this. Zheng paused. Her anger ebbed away. Shaman. Rain gestured to give me the floor, but I didn't bother to get up. Evelyn squeezed my hand. I found my throat closing up, my tongue growing thick in my mouth, my eyes burning. The bruises and the aches and pains don't matter, I managed to say. But I've burned out something inside me. My bioreactor is damaged. I've pushed too far. I've damaged myself. I don't know how or why, but I am out of action, Zheng. I could do brain math. Not right now, said Sevens. In theory, I added quickly. Then I sniffed. In theory I could do brain math, but I have no idea what it might do to me right now. Like running on a broken ankle. Zheng grunted. The quickest way to find Edward's house is for me to use brain math, I said. I felt Evelyn go stiff next to me as I said it out loud, but I plunged on ahead before I could start crying. We have other methods, searching manually, for example. But brain math is by far the quickest way, the cleanest way, the least risky way. For everybody else, at least. If we wanted to get this finished today, then I would have to push, on broken legs. And I swallowed, surrounded by people who loved me and who wanted me to stop acting like this. My bioreactor, the greatest gift the abyss had ever given me, the engine and fuel for the body I needed to inhabit, was hurt. I had taken myself for granted. I'd taken my body for granted. I'd pushed and pushed, listening to instinct which didn't know when to stop. I had risked wearing myself down to nothing. I had disrespected my body. I have been convinced to rest, I said, then had to wipe my eyes on my sleeve. Zheng stared. Rain nodded as if listening to a sage rather than a fool. Evelyn was stiff and still at my side. Seven sat like a pillar of ice. Shaman, Zheng said. Acceptance and acknowledgement, I began to breathe a sigh of relief. But then she finished, I will hunt alone. Zheng. I whined. No. I do not need your permission, she said. But oh, she wanted it. I saw it in the way she stared at me, through my skin and into my guts. I saw it in the way she angled her body toward Rain, in the way she tilted her eyes, in the way she flexed one hand, then the other. Zheng opened like a book, her musculature the poetry of a big cat at unwilling rest. Don't fight alone, I said. Please, Zheng. Not alone. Whoa, said Rain. Hold up a sec, left hand. What do you mean, hunt? What's your plan? Don't make plans alone and not share, hey. The lone wolf dies while the pack survives, right? Zheng turned heavy-lidded eyes toward Rain. Her entire frame was hard and tight with aggression. Zheng said nothing. Christine hopped and bit her own lower lip, probably restraining herself from telling Rain off for the particularly nasty swear word. Rain spread her hands, wide open, a come-and-get-me pose. Zheng turned away from everybody, as if petitioning a god for us all to shut up for 5 seconds. Zheng, I said, my voice still wet and thick. If you have to go hunt for the house, don't fight alone. You have my permission even if you don't need it. But don't get in a fight. If you find the house, come home. Please. I shot a glance at Rain. She shrugged and said, I can live with those conditions. As long as she comes home. Zheng turned dark eyes on me. I will always return to you, shaman. Call, I said. You have a mobile phone now. Use it. If you don't call by midnight I'll assume we need to come rescue you. Shaman. Call. Promise me. I will call, shaman. And she stalked off without another word, out of the room and down the corridor and out of the hole where the front door once stood. I guess that settles that then, Rain said. Thanks Heather, nice save. I smiled and shrugged and felt rather useless. I had done nothing. I wanted to curl up in a ball and go to sleep. After that, the decision was already made. Zheng would scout and report back. I hoped and prayed, but the rest of us were done, spent, the operation was over, as Rain phrased it. But the analysis was not quite yet complete. I sat there on the edge of unconscious exhaustion while the mages and the church discussed practicalities. Christine Hopton asked, at length, "Can we establish what the purpose of this attack was?" "Miss Say, earlier you were talking about multiple possibilities, you were quite clear about that. Have you changed your mind?" Twill snorted. "Purpose? To kill us, duh." Everyone ignored that except Felicity, who, bizarrely enough, offered Twill the most limp and tired fist bump I'd ever seen. Evelyn gave a serious but very slow answer, croaky and raw. "The use of outsiders. Physical entities, implies this was a response to what Edward Lilburn likely considers an existential threat. The illusion." "Spider," said Preem. "Cruel trick." "Yes, the spider," Evelyn agreed. "It was an attempt to draw us out, flush us out, whatever. Put us in the firing line of his real attack. Which we resisted and fought off. It's been what, 2 hours since then?" Michael confirmed. "And counting." Evelyn nodded. "I think that was all he had. His best shot." Twill squinted at her. "You mean we've won? That's it?" Felicity snorted, and it was one of the saddest sounds I'd ever heard. She raked her hair back, uncaring of how the gesture exposed the burned side of her face. "Contests between mages always get weird." "Yes," Evelyn said. "Quite. No, this isn't over. I meant that was probably all he had on hand to throw at us. He'll be working on something else already, but we shouldn't expect anything so simple as a physical assault." Then she frowned and added, "But we should expect that too." "Race against time," Felicity said. Evelyn nodded. "I spoke without thinking. As soon as I'm healed." Nobody said anything to that. Rain took a deep breath. Evelyn screwed her eyes up and muttered on, "We rest. One night at least. Then back to the task of the house. Quicker we find him, the better. Remove him or kill him, or whatever. He has knocked us out for a day or two. That's everybody's job now. Rest. Except Zheng, I suppose." Twill asked, "What about Lozzie and Tenny?" Rain answered. "Loz said they'll swing back home as soon as Tens is feeling better." My heart ached for Tenny, another wound I needed to mend. Evelyn sighed a grumbly sigh. "And there we come to the most thorny matter. Mr. and Mrs. Hopton. Amanda. Twill too, I suppose. And Hringewindla." Evelyn said that final name with a little cough. "If we withdraw home, we leave you without support or protection, even if just for a single night of sleep. We have ruined your house. We need to plan some kind of protection for you while we—" "Hringewindla," Amanda interrupted. Her voice was thick with sleep or trance. She was sitting on one of the recovered chairs, wobbling slightly from side to side, sniffing and snuffling, eyes red-rimmed, staring out of the door-hole and into the field beyond. She looked barely present. "Mandy," said Christine. "What is it? What does Hringewindla say?" "Protection is forthcoming," Amanda mumbled. "Hringewindla is very unhappy. He grows a hand." She pointed out of the door-hole, through the cling film cover of bubble servitors. None of us had been paying attention to what the spare bubble servitors were doing on the edge of the field, but now we all turned to look. Modified 3D glasses went on over human eyes. Evelyn craned her neck. Felicity turned in her chair. I frowned in confusion, then stared with awe. "Snail," said Preem. On the edge of the field, several dozen bubble servitors had combined their sphere mass bodies. Their surfaces had run together, melting and melding, turning smooth and glassy as they lost their individuality. Half complete, growing angel by angel, a vague snail form was taking shape, tall and fluted, with coils at angles which hurt the eyes. It was nowhere near as large as the tentacled shell core down beneath the earth, where we'd met the old man face to face, but the thing out in the field was only half complete and it was already halfway up to the roof of the house. He appoints a guardian and grows us a shell, Amanda said. We are loved and protected. His anger is not light. He thanks all of you. He will watch us. He will banish. She struggled, then swallowed and looked like she was going to be sick. Refute. Refuse? He wants to this Edward Lilburn. She screwed her eyes up and groaned. Christine went to her, hands gently rubbing her sister's head. It's okay, Mandy. It's okay. Don't try to translate. We understand. Evelyn nodded. We do indeed. Protection enough? I believe so, said Christine. But we will stay in touch. Until tomorrow. I'll call when we get home. Said Twill. Sorry to make this weird. But what about the guy? In the kitchen. You know, the guy. Evelyn shrugged. Take his phone number and address, then let him go. We're not warlords or mafia. Michael Hopton laughed. Could have fooled me. Felicity agreed with a grunt. That is exactly what we are, Evelyn. You know that. Evie's gaze flicked out and pinned Felicity to her chair. The older mage withered, retreated, and looked down. An old argument, perhaps. Curiosity almost overcame my exhaustion, but Evelyn concluded before I could ask. Are we? She said. Then my word is law. We're letting him live. That's final. Get him cleaned up, point him at the road, and remind him this was a drug operation. Nothing more. I nodded agreement, too tired to say anything. My free hand lingered at my flank, on the cold sleep of my bioreactor. Heal thyself, oh, abyssal squid, I prayed I wasn't broken.